The enduring narratives of ancient Greece have long captivated humanity, offering a slow and gentle journey into a world steeped in myth and wonder. These are the legendary accounts that have defied the relentless march of millennia, carefully preserved through countless generations, much like cherished heirlooms passed down with reverence. As the clamor of the modern world recedes, one might imagine settling into a quiet space, allowing the day's distractions to dissipate like the ephemeral morning mist over the cerulean Aegean Sea, preparing for an immersion into these profound historical sagas. A profound enchantment often accompanies the contemplation of these venerable narratives, with an atmosphere conducive to reflection, perhaps with subdued lighting and a subtle ambient hum. One can embark upon a mental voyage to an era when divine beings frequently traversed the mortal realm, and every towering peak or secluded valley was believed to guard an untold mystery. Imagine traversing the heart of an ancient Greek forest, where the very air is redolent with the crisp scent of pine needles mingled with the aromatic fragrance of wild herbs. Above, the dense interwoven canopy of ancient trees allowed only fractured shafts of sunlight to penetrate, casting dynamic patterns of golden warmth upon the forest floor. It is within this secluded, almost sacred environment that the initial narrative unfolds. A domain seldom trodden by human feet, serving as the favored sanctuary for the formidable goddess Artemis. Unlike many of her Olympian peers, who reveled in the bustling social intricacies and grand spectacles of Mount Olympus, Artemis possessed a distinct and solitary nature. Revered as the goddess of the hunt and the fierce protector of untamed creatures, her paramount concern was her own inviolable privacy. While other deities engaged in lavish banquets and tumultuous disputes within their celestial halls, Artemis consistently chose the profound tranquility of the wilderness, her only companions being her devoted retinue of hunting attendants. On one particular afternoon, the goddess Artemis had pursued her quarry with unwavering dedication since the first blush of dawn. Her iconic silver bow, a symbol of her prowess, caught and reflected the dappled sunlight filtering through the dense foliage, while her disciplined pack of hunting hounds moved with an almost ethereal silence through the thick underbrush. Yet, as the sun ascended to its zenith, casting its most powerful rays upon the ancient world, the goddess felt a different inclination. Her arduous morning's work now complete, she yearned for a moment of serene respite, a cleansing bath. Nestled deep within the verdant expanse of this forest, concealed almost entirely by a natural curtain of gracefully hanging willow branches, lay Artemis's most cherished secret, a secluded bathing pool. Its waters, perpetually cool and astonishingly crystal clear, were fed by a pristine natural spring that perpetually bubbled forth from the profound depths of the earth. The pool's bed was carefully lined with smooth, river-worn stones, while soft, verdant moss clung delicately to the surrounding rocks, creating an atmosphere of such profound stillness and sanctity that it instinctively compelled a hushed reverence, even in complete solitude. With a gentle motion, Artemis parted the concealing willow branches and entered her secluded sanctuary. Her loyal hunting companions, a retinue of nymphs who had forsaken the more traditional abodes of rivers and trees to serve her, immediately began assisting the goddess in shedding her hunting accoutrements. With practiced hands, they unlaced her sturdy leather boots, carefully detached her quiver brimming with silver arrows, and respectfully set aside her invaluable bow. The goddess then eased herself into the cool, inviting water, emitting a soft sigh that spoke volumes of her profound contentment. This was, for her, the most cherished interlude of her day, a precious moment when she could momentarily cast aside the mantle of a formidable Olympian deity and simply luxuriate in the unadulterated pleasure of cool water caressing her skin after a strenuous morning spent in pursuit of game. Yet, the profound tranquility of this sacred space was destined for an abrupt and unforeseen disruption. Not a great distance away, another figure moved through the dense forest, albeit with considerably less grace and stealth than the divine huntress. This was Actaeon, a young mortal renowned for his exceptional skill as a hunter, yet paradoxically less celebrated for his situational awareness or cautious navigation. Throughout the morning, he had been relentlessly tracking an unusually elusive deer, its hoofprints leading him ever deeper into the ancient woods. His devoted hunting dogs, their noses pressed diligently to the earth, surged ahead, their entire focus consumed by the compelling scent trail of their quarry. What Actaeon remained entirely oblivious to, however, was that with every step, he was encroaching upon hallowed ground. This particular expanse of the forest was consecrated to Artemis, a domain where the presence of mortals was unequivocally forbidden. Naturally, in the world of ancient Greece, there were no explicit markers or posted warnings, as one might find in a contemporary protected area. Nevertheless, an almost palpable essence permeated the very air, a profound sensation of archaic, potent energy that, to a more perceptive individual, might have served as an unmistakable harbinger to retreat. Driven by the faint, alluring murmur of running water, Actaeon pressed forward, forcing his way through an especially dense thicket of bushes. His mind was singularly focused on the notion that the elusive deer he had pursued might have paused at a water source for refreshment. The sudden silence of his usually boisterous dogs, an indicator that they were nearing their quarry, only reinforced his conviction. And then, with an abruptness that defied preparation, he emerged from the foliage, finding himself standing at the very brink of Artemis's clandestine pool. In that breathtaking instant, the very fabric of time seemed to suspend itself. There, in the crystalline waters, was Artemis, her form radiant, attended by her nymphs. Her gaze, initially wide with profound shock at the sight of this unexpected intruder, swiftly narrowed into an expression of chilling danger. One might reasonably assume that Actaeon would have instinctively offered a fervent apology and fled the scene with utmost haste. Such a reaction would undoubtedly have been the most prudent course of action. Instead, the mortal hunter remained utterly transfixed, simply staring. Perhaps he was too stunned to command his limbs, or perhaps he found himself utterly mesmerized by the overwhelming sight of an actual goddess, a vision of such divine beauty and power that it defied immediate comprehension. The possibility also exists that he simply could not reconcile the reality of what his eyes beheld. The nymphs surrounding Artemis collectively gasped, immediately moving to interpose themselves, attempting to shield their divine mistress from the brazen gaze. Yet, their efforts proved futile. The transgression was already complete. Actaeon had witnessed that which no mortal was ever destined to behold, and Artemis, the formidable goddess of the hunt and the uncompromising guardian of her own sanctity, was consumed by a righteous, incandescent fury. A distinctive characteristic of the Olympian deities, however, was their infrequent resort to mere verbal reprimand in moments of wrath. Instead, they favored the implementation of imaginative and often profoundly transformative retributions. In this regard, Artemis demonstrated a particularly inventive genius when confronted with those who dared to infringe upon her sacred solitude. With a deliberate, almost ritualistic gesture, she extended her arm and scooped a handful of the cool spring water. As the liquid collected within her divine palms, it shimmered with an ethereal luminescence, pulsating with palpable divine energy. Without uttering a single syllable, she hurled the enchanted water with devastating precision directly at Actaeon's face. The impact was akin to a splash of liquid starlight, at first merely cool against his skin, evoking no immediate alarm. Then, a slow, unsettling transformation began to unfold within him. The initial manifestation appeared in his own reflection upon the water's surface. Where his familiar human visage should have been, a terrifyingly alien countenance stared back. His nose elongated and darkened. His ears dramatically grew and contorted, migrating unnervingly to the crown of his head. Most horrifying of all, magnificent branching antlers, true antlers, began to erupt from his very skull. Panic seizing his rapidly altering form, Actaeon attempted to cry out, to offer a desperate apology, to articulate that his intrusion had been entirely unintentional. Yet, when his mouth opened, no human articulation emerged. Instead, a terrified bleat, the unmistakable sound of a deer, escaped his throat. Glancing downwards, his hands, once agile and human, were no longer hands at all, but had grotesquely reshaped into cloven hooves. His garments, once fitting, now hung loosely, absurdly, upon his shrinking and contorting frame as his body dramatically transformed. His human consciousness, with all its thoughts and memories, remained agonizingly intact, a prisoner within a form that was now irrevocably that of a magnificent stag. Then, a sound reached his newly formed deer ears, sending a primal jolt of terror through his rapidly beating heart. The unmistakable baying of dogs, his own loyal hunting pack, alerted by the strange sounds of his transformation, came bounding through the undergrowth to investigate. However, their keen senses failed to recognize their beloved master, Actaeon. All that registered to their predatory instincts was the presence of a large, tempting stag standing conspicuously near their preferred hunting grounds. Instinctively, they reacted precisely as they had been rigorously trained to do. Actaeon, trapped within his new form, attempted to cry out to them, to convey his true identity, to make them comprehend the horrific misunderstanding. But a deer possesses no language that a dog can understand, and his once faithful companions perceived nothing but a prime target where their master had stood moments before. The ensuing events unfolded into what many consider the most profoundly tragic chapter of this ancient tale. Actaeon, his human intellect agonizingly preserved within the confines of a deer's body, was forced to flee for his very life from his own cherished hunting pack. He plunged desperately through the dense forest, his new, unfamiliar limbs propelling him in frantic leaps over fallen logs and swift dodges between ancient trees. Behind him, his hounds pursued with the same relentless enthusiasm and focused determination they had always exhibited when hunting alongside their master. He ran until his newfound deer legs trembled uncontrollably with absolute exhaustion. He sought fleeting refuge behind craggy rocks and within impenetrable thickets of bushes. But ultimately, as the sun began its inexorable descent towards the horizon, his own relentless dogs finally closed in upon him. Meanwhile, at the now quiet bathing pool, Artemis had completed her ablutions and meticulously redonned her hunting attire. Her attendant nymphs clustered around her, their hushed whispers still recounting the astonishing intrusion of the mortal who had so brazenly stumbled into their consecrated domain. Was such an extreme measure truly necessary? One of the nymphs ventured to ask, her voice barely above a murmur. He appeared so youthful. Perhaps he was merely disoriented. Artemis, with an air of unyielding resolve, retrieved her luminous silver bow, delicately testing the taut string with a single finger. The action produced a soft, resonant hum that echoed subtly through the hushed forest. "The sanctity of privacy is inviolable," she declared with stark simplicity. "Mortals are compelled to learn that certain boundaries are absolute and must never be breached, regardless of intent or perceived accident." She paused, her divine senses attuned to the distant symphony of the ancient woods. From afar, faint but unmistakable, came the triumphant baying of dogs. The goddess understood its grim significance with chilling clarity. "Furthermore," she added, her tone perhaps marginally softened, "he was a hunter. He possessed an intrinsic understanding of the intricate, often brutal relationship between predator and prey. Now he has been granted the unique, albeit tragic, opportunity to experience both facets of that profound dynamic." As the cloak of night descended upon the ancient forest, Artemis and her ethereal companions vanished seamlessly into the deepening shadows that danced between the venerable trees. They left behind only the perpetual murmur of the bubbling spring and the melancholic whisper of the wind sifting through the willow branches. Yet, the enduring power of this narrative lies in the profound questions it continues to provoke. Was Artemis's extreme reaction solely a defense of her cherished privacy, or did the incident conceal a more profound, perhaps even symbolic, lesson? In the ancient world, it was widely held that the Olympian deities frequently employed severe, even brutal, lessons to impart crucial truths to mortals regarding respect, the inviolability of sacred boundaries, and the inescapable consequences that stem from one's actions. Furthermore, the very character of Actaeon remains a subject of enduring debate. Certain interpretations of the myth hint that his intrusion was not entirely accidental, suggesting he might have deliberately sought out the goddess, driven by a forbidden desire to glimpse her divine form. Conversely, other accounts portray him as an authentically lost hunter, an unfortunate soul who merely stumbled into a profoundly wrong place at the most inopportune moment. The lingering query remains: was Artemis's retribution justly administered, or did its severity far outweigh what could have been an unwitting error? And for any who might have found themselves in Actaeon's perilous position, would the instinct to flee have prevailed the instant the forbidden sight registered? Or would an overwhelming sense of awe have rendered one utterly immobile? The profound inquiry concerning equitable retribution now propels us into an even more chilling chronicle, one interwoven with the threads of familial discord, pervasive dread, and the abominable acts individuals commit when gripped by the terror of relinquishing power. Should the severity of Artemis's judgment upon Actaeon have struck you as particularly harsh, prepare yourself for an account of Cronus and the unspeakable deeds he perpetrated against his own progeny, which will undoubtedly prove far more unsettling. Let us journey further back into the mists of antiquity, To the very inception of the world as conceptualized by the ancient Hellenic civilization, this primordial epoch predated the majestic dominion of Zeus from the lofty reaches of Mount Olympus, preceding the construction of sacred temples or the emergence of human cities, indeed, even before the advent of humanity itself. In those nascent days, the cosmos was governed by formidable entities known as Titans, colossal, immensely potent beings who were the direct offspring and subsequent descendants of Gaia, the Earth herself. And among these primordial rulers, Cronus held the undisputed position as the sovereign monarch of all Titans. It is crucial to understand that Cronus had not ascended to his regal station through any form of democratic mandate or a tranquil, hereditary succession. On the contrary, his dominion was seized through an act of unspeakable horror perpetrated against his own progenitor Uranus, utilizing a formidable curved blade bestowed upon him by his mother. Cronus had launched a brutal assault, orchestrating a cataclysmic coup that not only deposed Uranus, but also fundamentally destabilized the very fabric of cosmic order. One might logically surmise that such a decisive victory, the successful overthrow of his father, would instill in Cronus a profound sense of security in his newly acquired sovereignty. Yet the reality was precisely the inverse. Each passing day was consumed by a gnawing anxiety, a persistent dread that an identical fate awaited him. As darkness descended, his repose was haunted by the unsettling suspicion that one of his own progeny might be clandestinely conspiring against him, mirroring the very betrayal he had inflicted upon his own father. Then, a fateful day arrived when Cronus was delivered a prophecy, a pronouncement so dire that it rendered his deepest, most persistent anxieties utterly trivial by comparison. This chilling oracle emanated directly from the formidable fates themselves, three ancient, venerable sisters who possessed the singular ability to perceive the intricate threads of destiny, weaving far into the unfolding future. Their pronouncement was stark in its simplicity, yet profoundly terrifying and utterly beyond repudiation. Indeed, one of your own offspring shall rise to depose you, precisely as you yourself usurped the authority of your father. In stark contrast to the typical human response, where individuals confronted with unsettling premonitions about their future might endeavor to alter their conduct to avert an undesirable outcome, perhaps striving to become more nurturing parents or raising their progeny with an abundance of affection rather than apprehension. Cronus, regrettably, chose a far more extreme and brutal course of action. His twisted logic dictated that if no children existed, then no child could ever pose a threat to his supremacy. However, a significant complication arose. Cronus was already bound in matrimony to his sister Rhea, a marital practice, it seems, entirely conventional among the Titans of that era, and she was already carrying their first offspring. Consequently, Cronus conceived a scheme that was as chillingly straightforward as it was utterly grotesque. He would permit the birth of his children, and then, without hesitation, he would devour them. Envision the harrowing tableau that unfolded upon the arrival of their inaugural child, a daughter designated Hestia. Rhea, though physically depleted by the arduous process of parturition, radiated the profound elation of a new mother. Cradling her infant close and gazing with tender adoration upon the minute, flawless countenance, her mind undoubtedly conjured visions of the myriad wonders she would impart to her daughter, the countless realms they would discover side by side, and the boundless affection they would share. It was at this poignant moment that Cronus strode into the chamber. "Present the child to me," he commanded, his voice a deep, resonant rumble characteristic of a Titan. Rhea, in her innocence, must surely have believed he desired to embrace his daughter, to bestow a paternal benediction upon her entry into the world. Instead, Cronus seized the infant in his colossal hands, unhinged his maw to an unimaginable extent, and in a single horrifying gulp, consumed tiny Hestia whole. Can one truly fathom the abyssal terror that must have engulfed Rhea? Is it possible to vividly conjure her anguished screams, her frantic, futile endeavors to halt the atrocity, her utter incomprehension as to why her husband would commit such an unspeakable act of monstrosity? Yet Cronus merely wiped his mouth with an air of detached satisfaction, departing the scene convinced he had neutralized at least one potential challenge to his dominion. The most profoundly distressing aspect of this narrative is that this was not an isolated incident, a singular lapse into madness. Upon the birth of their second progeny, a daughter christened Demeter, the identical horror transpired. Cronus seized the infant and swallowed her entirely. Next arrived Hera, their third offspring, condemned to the very same gruesome destiny. Then Hades, their inaugural son, vanished in a solitary gulp. Following him, Poseidon, their second son, suffered a similar fate. Another swift swallow, another precious child obliterated into the cavernous maw of their paternal devourer. A pertinent query might naturally arise. To what destination were these unfortunate children consigned once Cronus had consumed them? Were they, in fact, perishing? The response to this question is simultaneously unsettling and, in a peculiar way, reassuring, owing to the immutable nature of Cronus as an immortal Titan. His progeny, too, shared this divine imperviousness to death. Consequently, when he ingested them, their lives were not extinguished. Instead, they discovered themselves incarcerated within his vast stomach, alive, yet perpetually confined within an unending, oppressive gloom. Endeavor to conceptualize the existence of one of these captive offspring. You possess consciousness, faculties of thought. You can discern the faint presence of your siblings echoing within the suffocating darkness. However, egress is impossible. Maturation is denied. The opportunity to explore the boundless world is forever withheld. There is nothing to do but endure, suspended in the warm, constricted blackness of your father's monstrous interior. Concurrently, Rhea's despair deepened, and her heart shattered further with each successive child tragically lost. She implored Cronus, pleading with him to cease his barbaric acts. She attempted to conceal herself as the pangs of labor began, desperately seeking refuge. She even entreated other Titans for their intervention. Yet Cronus reigned supreme as the undisputed monarch, and an all-consuming fear of his wrath rendered everyone paralyzed, unwilling to intercede. By the time Rhea found herself pregnant with her sixth offspring, a profound realization settled upon her. She had to devise an entirely novel strategy. She could no longer endure the agony of surrendering another infant to her husband's insatiable, paranoia-driven appetite. Thus, she meticulously formulated a scheme that was both ingenious in its conception and extraordinarily perilous in its execution. When the moment arrived for the parturition of her sixth child, Rhea deliberately shunned their opulent palace. Instead, she journeyed a considerable distance to a secluded cavern nestled on the verdant island of Crete. There, enveloped by the solicitous care of benevolent nymphs who diligently muffled the sounds of her labor, she brought forth a son, whom she christened Zeus. However, rather than conveying the infant Zeus back to his tyrannical father, Rhea meticulously enveloped a substantial stone in swaddling clothes. She painstakingly ensured that the stone replicated the approximate dimensions and heft of a newborn. She even adorned it with a tiny cap, ensuring that from any appreciable distance it would convincingly resemble a genuine infant. Subsequently, she embarked on her return journey to their dwelling and presented this artifice of a baby to Cronus. One might reasonably assume that a paternal figure would possess the discernment to distinguish between a living infant and a mere lithic mass ensconced in blankets. However, it is imperative to recall that Cronus harbored no genuine desire for fatherhood. His entire being was consumed by an obsessive compulsion to annihilate any perceived threats to his absolute dominion, a fixation so profound that he never deigned to properly observe his offspring before consigning them to his gullet. Thus, when Rhea proffered the swaddled bundle, Cronus accepted it without any genuine scrutiny, and with the same chilling indifference, he swallowed the stone whole, precisely as he had devoured his 5 preceding children. In the interim, the infant Zeus remained sequestered within the hidden sanctuary of the Cretan cave, where he was nurtured by the devoted nymphs and sustained by the sweet nectar of honey and the rich milk provided by a mystical goat named Amalthea. With each passing day, his stature increased, and his inherent strength burgeoned. Concurrently, Rhea undertook clandestine visits, recounting to him the harrowing saga of his siblings, condemned to an eternal imprisonment within their father's cavernous stomach. As Zeus transitioned from infancy to robust young manhood, he assimilated the grim knowledge of his father's profound paranoia and the monstrous deeds that this overwhelming fear had impelled him to commit. And so, with deliberate calculation, Zeus commenced the intricate orchestration of his retribution. However, a compelling element that imbues this narrative with a unique resonance is the multifaceted nature of Zeus's burgeoning intentions. He was not merely contriving a scheme to exact punitive measures against his father for his inherent cruelty. His aspirations extended beyond mere vengeance. He harbored a profound resolve to liberate his entrapped brothers and sisters. In stark contrast to Cronus, who perceived his progeny solely as existential threats to his dominion, Zeus regarded them as legitimate members of his family, individuals unequivocally deserving of their freedom. A weighty question, however, persistently troubled Zeus's thoughts as he meticulously charted his course. Was he, by an inescapable decree of fate, destined to emulate his tyrannical father? Would his eventual overthrow of Cronus merely transform him into yet another despotic sovereign, condemned to a future plagued by apprehension and the eventual destruction of his own offspring? Or could he, through sheer will and foresight, shatter the pernicious cycle of violence that had ominously transitioned from Uranus to Cronus, and now loomed, threatening to perpetuate itself through his own reign? What profound psychological impetus compels an individual to perceive their own children as adversaries? Is it solely the visceral dread of relinquishing power? Or does it stem from a more profound, intrinsic incapacity to prioritize the affection for others above one's own self-preservation and security? Apropos of the intricate patterns of cyclical violence and their often unforeseen repercussions, our subsequent narrative commences with an outcome of breathtaking beauty, one that astonishingly blossomed from an act of unparalleled brutality within the entirety of mythological lore. It is almost as if the ancient Hellenes sought to impart a timeless wisdom. Even the most heinous occurrences possess the capacity to engender something truly magnificent. Recalling the cataclysmic event wherein Cronus violently deposed his father, Uranus, wielding that infamous curved blade. The ancient chroniclers of myth possessed remarkably precise conceptions regarding the aftermath of that singularly violent juncture. Their conviction held that as Uranus suffered his grievous wound, droplets of his immortal ichor, his divine blood, cascaded into the vast expanse of the sea. And from this celestial essence, intermingling with the effervescent foam and saline waters of the boundless ocean, a phenomenon of truly miraculous proportions commenced its genesis. Endeavor to visualize the unfolding spectacle. The Mediterranean Sea bathed in the ethereal glow of a morning so utterly serene that its surface mirrored a vast expanse of meticulously polished glass. The nascent sun was just beginning its ascent, meticulously painting the heavens in delicate hues of rose and shimmering gold. Gentle undulations of small waves rhythmically caressed the shoreline, bearing with them the customary bounty that the ocean habitually yields: fragments of lustrous sea glass, intriguing conch shells, and intricate skeins of seaweed. However, on this specific dawn, the advancing waves conveyed something entirely without precedent. Initially, the nascent form bore a striking resemblance to mere sea foam, that ephemeral white, effervescent substance that materializes when ocean waves collide against craggy coastlines. Yet, this particular foam possessed an undeniable distinction. It emanated a gentle, nacreous luminescence. Unlike ordinary foam, it did not dissipate. Instead, it progressively expanded in magnitude and intensified in brilliance as it gracefully drifted closer to the shore. And then, with an exquisite slowness and an inherent elegance, a distinct figure commenced its ascent from within the radiant, effulgent foam. This, indeed, was Aphrodite, the venerated goddess of profound love and sublime beauty, emerging into existence directly from the very embrace of the boundless sea. The ancient Greeks, in their profound contemplation of divine perfection, held very specific and exalted notions regarding the embodiment of ultimate beauty. Aphrodite, the radiant goddess, was not merely deemed attractive. She was the very essence of pulchritude made manifest, a living, breathing testament to aesthetic ideal. Her hair, a wondrous cascade of luminous threads, caught the nascent morning sunlight as if spun from the purest gold. Her skin, utterly devoid of imperfection, possessed the flawless, iridescent sheen of a freshly formed pearl. Her eyes, deep and captivating, mirrored the profound azure of the ocean on a tranquil summer's day. Yet her allure transcended mere physical attributes. An ineffable quality about Aphrodite's presence imbued everything in her vicinity with an enhanced loveliness. The sea foam that danced around her sparkled with the brilliance of countless diamonds. The mundane seashells scattered at her feet transformed in her radiant aura into objects resembling precious, polished jewels. Even the seagulls, soaring high above, seemed to execute their aerial ballets with an unprecedented grace and elegance whenever she drew near. As Aphrodite graced the shore for the very first time, a miraculous phenomenon unfolded. Vibrant flowers burst forth from the sand at each delicate step she took. These were no ordinary blossoms, but roses, the most exquisitely beautiful and intoxicatingly fragrant roses that any mortal or immortal had ever beheld. The very fabric of the earth seemed to hum with a joyous resonance, a verdant carpet unrolling in homage to her arrival. What proves particularly compelling about this inaugural moment, however, is that Aphrodite emerged fully formed, endowed with an inherent and complete comprehension of her identity and the full scope of her divine capabilities. Unlike the fragile, nascent stages of mortal infants, who must painstakingly acquire all knowledge, she instantaneously grasped her celestial status and understood that her boundless dominion encompassed love in all its myriad, intricate forms. And love, as Aphrodite would swiftly discern, proved to be far more nuanced and complex than the simple evocation of happiness or fleeting joy. The initial observation that captured her divine attention was the immediate and palpable impact her presence exerted upon the creatures surrounding her. A pair of sleek dolphins, previously engaged in their solitary aquatic ballet near the coastline, spontaneously commenced an elaborate courtship ritual, leaping and spinning through the crystalline waters with breathtaking, synchronized grace. Two squabbling seagulls, fiercely contending over a freshly caught fish, abruptly abandoned their territorial dispute and began tenderly preening each other's feathers with newfound affection. Even the silent plant kingdom responded to her ethereal influence. Trailing vines that had been growing in divergent directions suddenly intertwined, their tendrils reaching out to embrace. Solitary trees, standing in stoic isolation, began to subtly incline their branches toward their nearest arboreal neighbors, as if yearning for companionship and connection. Yet, amidst this burgeoning harmony, Aphrodite also perceived a more poignant phenomenon: the pervasive current of loneliness that permeated the nascent world. In the boundless ocean stretching behind her, she could distinctly feel the profound isolation of solitary creatures navigating the vast, silent depths. On the verdant land unfolding before her, she sensed the yearning of animals and spirits who had yet to experience the profound comfort of true companionship. And most remarkably, she could perceive the intricate emotional tapestries of her fellow gods, despite never having encountered them face to face. Distantly, she sensed Zeus's convoluted sentiments regarding the burdens of power and the weight of responsibility. She felt Hera's perpetual struggle, a tumultuous interplay between fervent love and corrosive jealousy. She even detected the quiet, underlying loneliness of Artemis, who, despite consciously choosing a path of solitude and independence, occasionally harbored unspoken wonderings about the experiences she might be forsaking. It was at this pivotal juncture that Aphrodite made a profound decision, one destined to shape the destinies of both gods and mortals for all eternity. She resolved that her divine mandate would transcend merely embodying love. She would actively cultivate and create myriad opportunities for love to blossom and flourish. Her initial endeavors were modest, focused on the immediate ecosystem around her. She gently encouraged the solitary dolphins to seek out and embrace companions. She extended her subtle influence to assist the lonely seabirds in discovering suitable mates. She even masterfully manipulated the subtle ocean currents, guiding fish that had been swimming in isolation towards potential partners. However, as she continued her exploration along the sun-drenched shoreline, delving deeper into this new world into which she had been born, Aphrodite began to grasp that love was far from being a simplistic, unadulterated blessing. She observed a pair of crabs engaged in a fierce, territorial skirmish and recognized that the potent desire to protect what one cherished could often escalate into bitter conflict. She witnessed a mother bird aggressively warding off other avian creatures that dared to approach her nest too closely. And through this, she understood that love frequently entangled itself with possessiveness and the sting of jealousy. Most surprisingly, she discovered that her very presence, her inherent divine aura, could inadvertently precipitate complications. As she glided past a pod of young dolphins, they were instantaneously captivated by her, abandoning their existing social bonds and relationships to follow her mesmerized along the shore. This unexpected consequence compelled her to learn a crucial skill, the careful regulation of her formidable influence, to wield it with thoughtful deliberation, rather than allowing it to indiscriminately affect every being in her vicinity. This profound realization marked Aphrodite's inaugural lesson in the immense responsibility that accompanied her extraordinary powers. Being the revered goddess of love did not simply equate to orchestrating universal infatuation. It demanded a nuanced comprehension of the delicate equilibrium existing between fervent desire and profound respect, between unbridled passion and guiding wisdom, between the impulse to unite individuals and the imperative to allow them the freedom to forge their own unique destinies. As the golden sun ascended higher in the cerulean sky, Aphrodite recognized the imminent necessity of establishing her rightful place among the pantheon of gods. She had been born with the innate understanding that other immortal beings existed, each presiding over their distinct domains and possessing their own complex personalities. Yet she also comprehended that her arrival would irrevocably alter the intricate dynamics of their established relationships in ways that no one, not even the wisest oracle, could possibly foresee. After all, what profound shifts occur when the very goddess of love materializes within a divine family already replete with its own share of convoluted entanglements and ancient grudges? What unpredictable consequences unfold when a being endowed with the power to sway emotions joins a formidable assembly of potent deities who are not always adept at navigating their own turbulent feelings? Aphrodite stood poised at the water's edge, her gaze sweeping across the boundless, shimmering sea that had given birth to her, then turning to survey the vast, promising land where her new existence awaited. The gentle wind playfully tousled her luminous golden hair, and at her feet, roses continued to bloom in an unending tribute. She was undeniably beautiful, immensely powerful, and eternally immortal. Yet, in a profound and paradoxical sense, she was also utterly alone. She was the sole entity of her kind, the singular being whose very essence was the embodiment of love itself. How, she pondered, does one forge authentic relationships when one's mere presence automatically colors and influences the emotions others feel towards you? How does one ascertain whether affection is genuine or simply a reflexive response to one's divine, irresistible nature? These were the weighty questions that Aphrodite carried within her heart as she took her momentous first steps away from the nurturing sea and embarked upon her journey toward the majestic peaks of Mount Olympus, where the other gods, blissfully unaware, awaited the epical arrival of love incarnate. And perhaps these very same profound questions continue to resonate with and challenge humanity in the modern era. How do we, in our own complex lives, strike a harmonious balance between the inherent human yearning to be loved and the essential need to remain true to our authentic selves? How can we truly discern when our profound feelings for another are born of genuine connection and when they are merely a superficial reaction to transient attractions? How do we navigate the intricate labyrinth of loving others while steadfastly preserving our own individual identity and sense of self? These fundamental inquiries into identity and authenticity lead us directly to one of the most terrifying and existential challenges ever confronted by Zeus himself. It was a monumental conflict that tested not merely his formidable strength and strategic prowess, but the very legitimacy of his claim to universal dominion. For sometimes, the gravest threats emerged not from the familiar specters of familial betrayal or the intricate complications of romantic entanglements, but from primordial forces of pure, unadulterated, chaotic destruction. By this juncture, Zeus had already achieved monumental victories. He had successfully overthrown his tyrannical father, Cronus, liberated his imprisoned siblings from their grotesque confinement within Cronus's stomach, and firmly established himself as the undisputed king of the gods, reigning supreme from his lofty throne on Mount Olympus. One might reasonably assume that this period would offer Zeus a well-deserved respite, an opportunity to savor the fruits of his hard-won triumph. Instead, it was precisely then that Gaia, the ancient Earth herself, decided to orchestrate a definitive test, a trial to ascertain whether Zeus truly merited his elevated position. You see, Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, had endured the agonizing spectacle of her children and grandchildren locked in brutal internecine warfare for countless generations. First, Uranus had displayed an abhorrent cruelty towards his own offspring. Subsequently, Cronus had violently deposed Uranus. Now, Zeus had, with equal ferocity, overthrown Cronus. Gaia was utterly weary of this relentless cycle of familial violence, and was particularly incensed by Zeus's decision to imprison many of her other beloved children, the formidable Titans, within the deepest, most abyssal reaches of the underworld. Consequently, Gaia resolved to forge a champion, a being of unparalleled power, capable of vanquishing Zeus once and for all. Her ultimate objective was not to install a new ruler in his stead, but rather to irrevocably shatter the perpetual cycle of violent power struggles by utterly annihilating the very concept of divine kingship. She retreated to the most profound and secret caverns nestled beneath the earth's crust, where the very rock remained in a molten state, and the air shimmered with an oppressive, infernal heat. There, within a vast, echoing cavern illuminated solely by the ominous glow of subterranean lava streams, Gaia commenced her most ambitious and terrifying creation to date. She meticulously gathered dark, primordial clay from the deepest ocean trenches, infused it with the raw, elemental fire from the Earth's churning core, and breathed into this nascent form the entirety of her incandescent rage, her profound frustration, and her fervent desire for an end to divine tyranny. What ultimately emerged from this cataclysmic process was an entity unlike anything that had ever existed before, and hopefully a horror that would never again grace existence. His name was Typhon, and he was meticulously engineered to be the perfect anti-god, a walking embodiment of destructive opposition. Imagine the most colossal mountain you have ever encountered, then imbue it with the capacity for malevolent movement, sentient thought, and an all-consuming hatred. Typhon was of such gargantuan proportions that when he stood erect, his monstrous head scraped against the distant stars. His eyes, burning with an infernal intensity, glowed like miniature malevolent suns. In lieu of hair, a writhing, venomous mass of serpents covered his scalp, each capable of delivering a bite potent enough to extinguish the lives of 100 mortals with ease. But perhaps the most terrifying aspect of his grotesque form lay in his hands. From his elbows downwards, instead of conventional arms and hands, Typhon possessed 100 monstrous dragon heads, each equipped with the dreadful to unleash a distinct form of destruction. Some belched forth torrents of scorching fire, others exhaled noxious, suffocating gases, while yet others expelled a frigid gale so intense it could instantaneously encase living creatures in an icy tomb. When Typhon first tore his way from the earth's depths, his mere act of rising to his full, terrifying height triggered catastrophic earthquakes across the entirety of the known world. His thunderous roar, a cacophony emanating not merely from his monstrous maw, but amplified 100-fold by the gaping mouths of his serpentine hands, rent the very air, splintering mountains into shards and unleashing devastating avalanches thousands of miles away. The first time the Olympian gods, residing in their celestial sanctuary, witnessed Typhon's terrifying approach, their immediate reaction was not to stand their ground and engage in battle. Instead, it was to flee, to escape as swiftly as their divine forms allowed. And these were the very same gods who had successfully waged war against the formidable Titans, who commanded the raw power of lightning and earthquakes, and who held dominion over the underworld itself. But Typhon was an entirely different category of threat. He was not merely powerful. He was chaos incarnate, destruction for its own sake, the very undoing of everything they had painstakingly constructed and held dear. One by one, the illustrious Olympian gods, gripped by an overwhelming terror, sought refuge in the ancient lands of Egypt. There they ingeniously adopted animal guises, hoping to elude the relentless, scrutinizing gaze of the monstrous Typhon. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, transformed herself into a shimmering fish, vanishing into the watery depths. Apollo, the radiant god of music and light, assumed the form of a dark, watchful crow. Artemis, the huntress, became a sleek and agile cat. Even the formidable Ares, the very embodiment of war, found himself compelled to morph into a formidable boar, seeking concealment in the most remote reaches of the vast Nile Delta. Yet, amidst this panicked exodus, Zeus, the sovereign king of the gods, remained steadfast and resolute. His decision to stand his ground was not born of a lack of fear. Indeed, the ancient narratives unequivocally portray Zeus as utterly terrified of Typhon's immense power. Rather, his unwavering stance stemmed from a profound realization that eluded his divine kin. He understood that if he were to abandon this pivotal confrontation, if he permitted Typhon to utterly devastate Mount Olympus and dismantle the entire edifice they had painstakingly constructed, then Gaia, the primordial Earth Mother, would achieve her ultimate objective. The glorious age of the gods would draw to an abrupt close, and the cosmos would irrevocably regress to a state of formless, primordial chaos. Thus, Zeus stood in solitary defiance upon the loftiest peak of Mount Olympus, his potent thunderbolts crackling with raw energy in his hands, patiently awaiting Typhon's inevitable arrival. When the titanic battle finally commenced, it unfolded with a ferocity and scale utterly unprecedented in the annals of the world. Zeus, unleashing his formidable might, hurled bolt after bolt of searing lightning at Typhon. Each incandescent strike was brilliant enough to instantly blind any mortal who dared to witness it, and resounded with a thunderous roar that reverberated across the globe. Yet Typhon, the colossal adversary, appeared to scarcely acknowledge these devastating assaults. While the lightning strikes left indelible scorch marks upon his craggy, rocky hide, they proved utterly insufficient to impede his relentless advance. Simultaneously, Typhon's 100 monstrous dragon heads unleashed their varied and horrifying forms of destruction upon Zeus. Torrents of fire so intensely hot they could melt solid bronze. Clouds of venomous poison that instantly withered all plant life for miles around, and blasts of ice so profoundly cold they froze the very air itself. Zeus was compelled to employ every ounce of his legendary speed and agility merely to avoid utter annihilation within the opening minutes of this cataclysmic combat. The grueling struggle persisted not just for days, but for weeks on end, a relentless test of divine endurance. The ceaseless, deafening thunder of Zeus's lightning and the guttural, earth-shaking roars emanating from Typhon's heads conspired to generate unprecedented storms that unleashed torrential downpours, submerging entire regions beneath vast sheets of water. The intense heat generated by their clashing powers was so immense that it melted the snow on distant mountain peaks, sending torrents cascading downwards. The very earth, groaning under the immense pressure of their impacts, cracked and split open in gaping fissures. However, as the protracted conflict wore on, Zeus slowly began to grasp a critical truth. He could not hope to prevail in this battle through sheer strength alone. Typhon was simply too overpoweringly mighty, too astonishingly resilient, and too utterly saturated with destructive energy. Every time Zeus believed he had managed to secure a momentary advantage, Typhon would unleash some novel and terrifying form of attack, inexorably forcing Zeus back onto the defensive. It was at this critical juncture that Zeus recalled a fragment of ancient wisdom imparted to him long ago by his grandmother, Gaia, even before their relationship had devolved into enmity. She had once sagely remarked that the very earth itself constituted an immense reservoir of strength, but also that this same earth could be ingeniously weaponized against those who sought only to destroy rather than to protect. Consequently, instead of persisting in his futile attempts to directly obliterate Typhon, Zeus embarked upon a radically different approach. He began to wield his lightning not as instruments of direct harm, but rather as precision tools. He aimed his strikes at the ground surrounding Typhon, his intent not to wound the colossal monster directly, but instead to instigate colossal rock slides and devastating avalanches. Initially, this novel tactic seemed utterly ineffectual. Typhon merely smashed through the cascade of falling rocks as if they were insignificant pebbles. Yet, Zeus persevered, relentlessly striking the earth, continuously triggering landslides, and steadily piling stone upon stone. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, the accumulating rock and debris began to mound around Typhon's massive feet. It demanded yet another full week of unremitting lightning strikes from Zeus. But eventually, through sheer tenacity, he succeeded in burying Typhon up to his waist in a colossal mound of loose rock and geological detritus. The monstrous entity, though now partially immobilized, continued its furious struggle, still breathing its various destructions from its numerous dragon heads. But its mobility had been irrevocably curtailed. It was then that Zeus executed his final, desperate gambit. Rather than attempting the seemingly impossible task of killing Typhon outright, Zeus leveraged his formidable power over earthquakes to cleave open the very earth beneath the now buried monster. Then, with a singular lightning strike more potent than any he had ever conjured before, he brought an entire mountain crashing down upon Typhon. This colossal mountain, which ultimately served as Typhon's eternal prison, was none other than Mount Etna. And according to the ancient Greeks, Typhon remains forever ensnared beneath its colossal mass. Every time the volcano erupts, they believed it was because Typhon, still trapped below, still seething with rage, was desperately breathing fire and striving with all his might to break free from his subterranean confinement. However, the truly intriguing aspect of this ancient narrative resides in the nature of Zeus's victory. He triumphed not by demonstrating superior physical might over Typhon, but by exhibiting superior intellect. He secured his victory through the strategic application of patience rather than relying solely on brute power, by thinking with cunning foresight instead of merely fighting with greater ferocity. When the other Olympian deities finally returned from their Egyptian exile and discovered Zeus, utterly exhausted but undeniably victorious amidst the ruins of the ravaged battlefield, they collectively inquired how he had managed to vanquish a foe that had instilled such profound terror in all of them. Zeus's succinct response was illuminating. I did not defeat him by being more powerful. I defeated him by remembering what I was fighting for. And perhaps this profound lesson resonates far beyond the confines of ancient mythology. Sometimes, the most formidable challenges we encounter in our lives cannot be overcome simply by redoubling our efforts or by striving to be physically stronger. Sometimes they demand that we pause, reflect thoughtfully, and reconnect with what truly holds significance for us. This profound concept of recalling the core purpose of our struggle seamlessly transitions us to one of the most celebrated heroes in the entirety of Greek mythology, and a compelling tale illustrating how, on occasion, the most crucial battles are waged not against monstrous creatures themselves, but against the very systemic structures that inadvertently give rise to such monsters in the first place. Let us now journey from the ethereal dominion of the gods to the more tangible realm of mortals, to the breathtakingly beautiful island of Crete, where the sagacious King Minos reigned with notable wisdom, immense wealth, and a deeply unsettling secret meticulously concealed beneath the foundations of his opulent palace. This clandestine secret was known as the Labyrinth, and it stood as the most intricate and bewildering maze ever conceived by human ingenuity. Designed by the legendary master craftsman Daedalus, it comprised a sprawling, subterranean network of convoluted corridors, perplexing dead ends, and deceptive false passages, engineered with such confounding complexity that any individual who ventured within its depths would become hopelessly disoriented and lost within mere minutes. And at the very heart of this bewildering labyrinth resided a creature that should, by all natural order, never have come into existence, the fearsome Minotaur. Now, the very genesis of the Minotaur was a tragedy woven from threads of divine retribution and dire human consequences. King Minos, in an act of hubris, had once incurred the wrath of the sea god Poseidon, and Poseidon's vengeful reprisal had manifested in the form of a cruel curse, compelling Minos' royal wife to fall inexplicably in love with a magnificent sacred bull. From this unnatural and abhorrent union was born the Minotaur, a grotesque creature possessing the powerful physique of a man, yet crowned with the fearsome head of a bull. It was endowed with human intelligence, but simultaneously driven by an insatiable bestial hunger. King Minos, consumed by profound shame and abject horror at this living embodiment of his family's curse, had subsequently commissioned Daedalus to meticulously construct the labyrinth, intending it as an inescapable prison for the creature. The Minotaur, though confined, could never truly escape, nor could it ever find the release of death, nor could it ever attain peace, destined to remain perpetually a monster trapped within an eternity of darkness. But here is where the narrative descends into an even deeper layer of tragedy. To satiate the Minotaur's ceaseless, monstrous appetite, King Minos had imposed a terrible and cruel tribute upon the prosperous city of Athens. With a grim regularity, every 7 years, Athens was forcibly compelled to dispatch 7 of its young men and 7 of its young women to Crete. There, these 14 unfortunate souls would be thrust into the bewildering depths of the labyrinth, to be relentlessly hunted down and ultimately devoured by the ravenous Minotaur. One can only imagine the devastating implications of this decree for Athenian families. Every 7 years, 14 families would suffer the irreplaceable loss of their beloved children to this horrific fate. The victims were selected through a cruel lottery system, which meant that every family with young members lived under the constant, agonizing shadow of fear, dreading the day their son or daughter might be chosen next. It was into this harrowing and seemingly intractable situation that our hero, Theseus, courageously stepped forward. Theseus was, in fact, the royal son of King Aegeus of Athens, yet he had spent his formative years far removed from the opulent royal palace, having been raised by his mother in a quiet, unassuming coastal town. He had only recently arrived in Athens and, by chance, had just learned of his illustrious royal heritage. Consequently, when the time arrived for the 3rd iteration of the terrible tribute to be dispatched to Crete, Theseus was witnessing this profound tragedy for the very first time. He observed with a heavy heart as the 14 young Athenians were arbitrarily chosen by lot. He witnessed the inconsolable weeping of their families and the resigned, hollow despair reflected in the eyes of the victims themselves. He listened as the older, more jaded citizens explained with weary resignation that this was simply the unalterable way things were, that there was no conceivable point in attempting to defy King Minos and his monstrous creation. However, Theseus, being young and not yet jaded by years of passively accepting the unacceptable, posed a remarkably simple yet profoundly challenging question. Why do we not simply refuse to send the tribute? The answer, he quickly ascertained, was that King Minos's formidable navy was overwhelmingly powerful. If Athens were to refuse to comply with the tribute, Minos would undoubtedly unleash his fleet, invade, and utterly decimate the city entirely. It was, therefore, argued that it was a lesser evil to sacrifice 14 young lives every 7 years than to risk the complete destruction of the entire populace. This cold, pragmatic logic failed to satisfy Theseus in the slightest. Instead, he made a startling announcement that sent shockwaves through everyone present, including his own father. He declared that he would volunteer to be one of the 14 tributes, and he would, moreover, personally slay the Minotaur. King Aegeus was utterly horrified. He had only just been joyously reunited with his long-lost son, and now Theseus seemed intent on recklessly throwing his life away on what appeared to be an utterly impossible endeavor. Dozens of young people had already been sent into the treacherous labyrinth over the preceding years, and not a single one had ever emerged alive. Many of them had been highly trained warriors. What then made Theseus so confident that he could succeed where all others had so spectacularly failed? Theseus's response, delivered with quiet conviction, revealed something profoundly important about the very core of his character. He stated, "Perhaps I cannot kill the Minotaur, but I can ensure that I am the last person who dies trying." You see, Theseus harbored a meticulously conceived plan that extended far beyond the mere act of fighting the monstrous beast. He had diligently dedicated himself to studying every known detail about the labyrinth, engaging in conversations with Daedalus's former apprentices, and meticulously learning about its intricate construction and bewildering layout. He had come to believe that the true, insurmountable challenge lay not in vanquishing the Minotaur itself, but rather in successfully navigating the labyrinthine maze and finding a way out afterward. Thus, when the ship carrying the 14 tributes finally arrived in Crete, Theseus was not merely equipped with conventional weaponry. He was also carrying a humble, yet crucial, ball of thread. Yet prior to delving into the celebrated stratagem of the thread, there exists a frequently neglected segment of this profound narrative. As Theseus meticulously prepared for his daunting confrontation with the formidable Minotaur, his presence unexpectedly drew the notice of Ariadne, the daughter of King Minos himself. Ariadne had spent her entire upbringing acutely aware of the Minotaur's existence, cognizant of the grim tribute exacted, and fully informed about the scores of young individuals who vanished into the intricate confines of the labyrinth every 7 years. Nevertheless, she had never before encountered any of the victims directly. They were invariably kept sequestered from the royal family, lamentably treated more like mere offerings for sacrifice than as actual human beings. Her meeting with Theseus irrevocably altered this perception. For the very first time, she stood face to face with someone on the precipice of death, destined to feed her family's monstrous secret. Crucially, unlike all those who preceded him, Theseus was not meekly accepting his destiny. He was actively strategizing a vigorous counterattack. This unforeseen encounter ignited a profound ethical quandary within Ariadne's conscience. She possessed the means to potentially preserve Theseus's life by assisting him in successfully traversing the bewildering maze of the labyrinth. However, undertaking such an action would inevitably entail committing an act of disloyalty against her paternal sovereign, and could potentially imperil her entire lineage should Minos ever uncover her clandestine betrayal. Ultimately, Ariadne made a choice that would irrevocably shape her future existence. She arrived at the conviction that certain oppressive structures are simply intolerable to endorse, even if fighting against them meant forfeiting all familiar comforts and associations she had ever known. On the eve prior to Theseus's scheduled entry into the labyrinth, Ariadne clandestinely sought him out in his austere cell. She presented him with a gift that Daedalus himself had once bestowed upon her, an enchanted spool of twine that would infallibly guide one back to its initial anchor, regardless of how extensively it was unreeled into the maze's depths. "Tie one end to the entrance," she murmured softly, her voice barely a whisper. "Unroll it as you venture deeper into the maze. When you have vanquished the monster, follow the thread back to freedom." Beyond this ingenious device, she also furnished him with something equally invaluable: an intimate understanding of the Minotaur's habits. knowledge only accessible to someone who had been raised within the royal precincts. The creature, she revealed, was most formidable under daylight hours, but became prone to lethargy after dusk. It possessed severely impaired vision, but compensated with an exceptionally keen olfactory faculty. While sufficiently cunning to devise snares, it was also so consumed by arrogance that a direct confrontation would compel it to forsake tactical planning in favor of raw, unrefined power. The next morning, as the first light touched the ancient stones, Theseus ventured into the bewildering construct of the labyrinth, equipped not only with Ariadne's ingenious spool and her invaluable insights, but also burdened with the collective aspirations of all those who had ever lost someone to King Minos's tyrannical regime. The labyrinth proved far more perplexing and bewildering than he had anticipated. Its towering walls were intricately carved with illusory portals and deceptive glyphs, designed to disorient. The passageways meandered, bifurcated, and intricately reversed course in ways that overtly challenged rational comprehension. Even with the infallible thread to guide him back, Theseus found himself becoming uncertain of his precise orientation within the twisting maze. Yet he persevered resolutely, pressing deeper and deeper into the maze's heart, guided by the subtle exhalations of the Minotaur and the increasingly potent aroma of ancient ossuaries and palpable dread. When he finally arrived at the heart of the labyrinth, Theseus discovered himself in a rotund enclosure, lit by a solitary beam of celestial illumination filtering from far above. And there, slumbering amidst a macabre mound of skeletal remains, was the Minotaur. It was of more modest stature than Theseus had anticipated, yet simultaneously possessed a greater semblance of humanity. The creature's body was that of a robust male, bearing the indelible marks of countless skirmishes, but still exhibiting an unexpected fluidity of motion. Only the head was genuinely grotesque, a colossal bovine cranium adorned with antennae of such formidable sharpness as to readily penetrate cupric plate armor. For a fleeting moment, Theseus paused. This was more than merely a savage beast. It was simultaneously an unfortunate casualty, a creature bereft of agency in its own monstrous genesis, perpetually confined to perpetual gloom and sustained by a grim regimen of involuntary sacrifices. But then Theseus recalled the countless youths who had perished in this very chamber, and he knew with chilling certainty that clemency shown to the Minotaur meant the perpetuation of fatalities among forthcoming guiltless individuals. The battle itself was surprisingly brief, yet no less arduous. The Minotaur fought with the fury born of prolonged incarceration, its movements desperate and wild. But Theseus fought with the unwavering resolve of an individual burdened with the collective aspirations of everyone who had ever been offered up to perpetuate an inequitable order. When the brutal encounter was concluded, Theseus traced Ariadne's guiding filament in reverse, navigating back through the serpentine corridors to the entrance of the labyrinth. Behind him, he triumphantly escorted the remaining 13 Athenian youths destined for sacrifice, who had been waiting near the entrance, scarcely permitting themselves the luxury of optimism that rescue was even possible. However, Theseus's narrative does not conclude with his escape from Crete, because the slaying of the beast merely marked the inception of transforming the very framework responsible for the monster's existence in the first place. And that, perhaps, is the paramount insight of this ancient tale. Sometimes, authentic bravery resides not solely in confronting the monstrous entity, but in facing the protracted, arduous endeavor of constructing a society wherein such abominations cease to be engendered. Imagine for a moment the most peculiar cephalalgia in the history of the universe. One awakens one morning and perceives one's head to feel as if it might cleave asunder. But one is Zeus, sovereign of the entire Olympian pantheon, so one's headaches are seldom mundane. This specific dawn on Mount Olympus commenced like any other. The sun god Helios was just beginning to pilot his celestial conveyance through the heavens, illuminating the palatial marble pillars of the great palace in soft golden light. Zeus had been traversing the expansive corridors of his home, one hand firmly clasped to his brow, striving to comprehend this unusual perception that had been intensifying over a period of several days. You see, months earlier, Zeus had received a disquieting oracle. The Fates, those venerable siblings who meticulously spun the very strands of destiny, had imparted a hushed revelation that caused even the formidable Lord of Lightning to hesitate. They foretold that Métis, his first wife and the revered goddess of wisdom, would bear him a child who would one day usurp his dominion, just as Zeus himself had overthrown his own father, Cronus. Zeus, acting in characteristic fashion, had done what seemed logical at the time, though it sounds quite strange to us now. He had ingested Métis entirely, thinking this would avert the fulfillment of the divine prediction. But sagacity, it transpired, resisted such facile suppression. Even inside Zeus, Metis persisted in nurturing their progeny, and that child continued to develop, learning and growing in the most extraordinary prenatal environment conceivable. For months, Zeus perceived the burgeoning offspring's stirrings, cogitations, and even its industrious fabrications inside his head. One might indeed wonder what it would feel like to have someone constructing artifacts within one's cranium. The resonance of miniature mallets upon metallic surfaces reverberated through Zeus's mind day and night. The child, it seemed, was already working, already creating, already preparing for the world outside. This morning, though, the sensation had become intolerable. Zeus summoned Hephaestus, the divine artisan of flame and metallurgy, who was also his son. Hephaestus arrived at the palace with his cupric cleaver still radiating heat from the smithy. Grime streaked upon his sinewy limbs, wondering why his father had commanded his presence with such immediacy. "My head," Zeus stated simply, and Hephaestus comprehended implicitly. Divinities possess an intuitive grasp of circumstances precluding extensive elucidation. Hephaestus had been anticipating this specific juncture, had even envisioned it in his reveries within his workshop during quiet afternoons, when the only sounds were the measured percussion of mallet against smithy block. They stood together on the most elevated parapet of the palace, where the auroral atmosphere was rarefied and unsullied. Below them, the sphere of humanity pursued its quotidian routines, cultivators inspecting their oleaceous plantations, piscators repairing their meshes, youngsters frolicking in sun-baked enclosures. Unbeknownst to them, they were on the cusp of observing the emergence of a divine female. Hephaestus elevated his implement, and with one accurate, deliberate blow, he cleaved Zeus's brow. What transpired next was utterly unprecedented, so extraordinary that even the other members of the Olympian pantheon, who had witnessed many strange things, ceased their discourse and gazed in astonished admiration. From Zeus's head issued forth a complete adult female, already dressed in a resplendent panoply seemingly forged from the very luminescence of distant stars. Her helmet captured the dawn's effulgence, and reflected it in dazzling beams. Her spear was impeccably poised, her shield burnished to a reflective sheen. This was Athena, divine patroness of sagacity and conflict, born not as a vulnerable neonate, but as an entirely developed entity, prepared to assume her rightful station amidst the divine assembly. But here is what made this moment all the more extraordinary. Athena's initial gesture was neither vocalization nor locomotion, but profound cogitation. One could discern it in her cerulean gaze, the way her eyes assimilated her surroundings with meticulous deliberation. She scrutinized the palatial edifice's structural design, perceiving the precise intercolumniation and its underlying rationale. She beheld the interplay of illumination upon the polished marble surfaces and comprehended the inherent mathematical principles behind it. When she finally spoke, her voice was serene and deliberate. "Father," she articulated to Zeus, "I understand now why I was preserved securely within your mental faculties. The mortal realm presents a multitude of tasks requiring attention." Zeus, gently caressing his miraculously restored brow, beamed with a mixture of alleviation and paternal satisfaction. What is truly the captivating aspect of Athena's genesis is how it mirrors the paramount virtues esteemed by Hellenic civilization. She was not engendered by fervent emotion or serendipitous occurrence, but by pure intellect itself. She manifested in full maturity, for sagacity does not accrue incrementally. It unfolds in its entirety, poised to confront any forthcoming trials. In the days that followed, Athena traversed the sacred peaks of Mount Olympus with the inquisitiveness of a neophyte beholding existence for the very first time, yet with the profound comprehension of an entity that had been contemplating it for an extended duration. She sought out Hephaestus in his industrious domain, absorbing insights into the arts of fabrication and construction. She engaged in discourse with Apollo regarding melodic composition and lyrical verse, perceiving instantaneously the symbiotic interplay of cadence and measure in the generation of aesthetic excellence. However, what captured her discerning gaze most profoundly was the vibrant realm of mortal existence unfolding beneath her. From her elevated celestial perch, she observed burgeoning cities grappling with the intricate challenge of establishing coherent social structures, individuals striving assiduously to untangle complex dilemmas of jurisprudence and public administration, and dedicated artisans relentlessly endeavoring to elevate their crafts to pinnacles of perfection. It became unmistakably clear that this was precisely where her profound sagacity could offer its most vital contribution. The inaugural urban center Athena elected to offer her benevolent guidance to was destined, in due course, to proudly bear her illustrious name, Athens. The populace there was engaged in fervent deliberation over the optimal blueprint for their societal organization, painstakingly seeking equitable methodologies for collective decision-making. Athena meticulously monitored their impassioned discussions, noting with keen interest the arduousness of their struggle with inquiries that, to them, appeared utterly devoid of facile solutions. She manifested herself to the Athenians not as an imposing conqueror or a dominant divine figure, but rather as an enlightened mentor. In the bustling heart of the city, as central agora, she meticulously demonstrated the sophisticated skills of pottery, the intricate art of weaving, and the vital practice of olive cultivation. These were no arbitrary proficiencies. Each distinct craft inherently embodied a unique facet of profound wisdom. The creation of pottery imparted the invaluable virtue of patience, and fostered the understanding that objects of enduring utility and beauty could be skillfully fashioned from the most unassuming common earth. Weaving, conversely, eloquently illustrated how myriad individual threads, when meticulously organized and harmoniously integrated, coalesce to form a fabric far more robust and aesthetically pleasing than any solitary strand. And the cultivation of olives compellingly exemplified foresight and long-term strategic thinking, given that olive trees demand numerous years to attain maturity, yet subsequently yield essential sustenance and precious oil for successive generations. The citizens of Athens assimilated these invaluable teachings with remarkable aptitude. They began to perceive their burgeoning city not merely as a geographical location where their lives coincidentally transpired, but as a dynamic entity they possessed the collective capacity to meticulously mold and progressively enhance through diligent intellectual application and sustained, patient endeavor. Consequently, they innovated novel frameworks for governance, devised sophisticated new methodologies for achieving consensus in group decisions, and pioneered fresh educational paradigms that placed paramount emphasis on the cultivation of clear, analytical thought when confronting multifaceted problems. What proved particularly compelling was the expansive reach of Athena's transformative influence. Other city-states, hearing widespread reports of the extraordinary sagacity being practiced and cultivated within Athens, dispatched their own erudite representatives to learn and absorb these innovative principles. These visiting delegates would eventually return to their homelands, enriched with groundbreaking concepts concerning architectural design, the organization of complex societies, and crucially, the resolution of contentious disputes through reasoned discourse rather than aggressive confrontation. Yet Athena, in her characteristic humility, never asserted ownership of these widespread improvements. When mortals expressed their heartfelt gratitude, she would gently underscore that the innate sagacity had, in fact, resided within their very beings all along. She had simply facilitated the systematic organization of their thoughts, much in the same way that her own miraculous birth had involved the coalescing of Zeus's disparate and scattered ideas into a singular, clear, and purposeful entity. As you prepare to rest tonight, ponder that extraordinary moment of Athena's emergence. Reflect on how, sometimes, the most profoundly significant revelations do not emanate from external sources, but rather arise from the meticulous ordering of what we inherently carry within. Consider the myriad concepts currently incubating within your own mind, patiently awaiting the opportune moment to manifest, fully actualized. What profound wisdom might you uncover tomorrow that has been subtly germinating in the background of your consciousness, poised to illuminate your perception of the world with newfound clarity? Extending this reflection on wisdom and the true essence of what we genuinely cherish, let us now delve into the compelling narrative of a monarch who was convinced he possessed an infallible understanding of his desires, only to confront the stark realization that the fulfillment of our deepest wishes does not invariably manifest as the unequivocal blessing we so eagerly anticipate. King Midas held dominion over Phrygia, a venerable kingdom gracefully situated within the geographical confines of what we presently identify as Turkey. Its landscape was characterized by gently undulating hills, generously interspersed with verdant olive groves and flourishing vineyards. His opulent palace commanded breathtaking vistas of expansive valleys where diligent shepherds meticulously guided their flocks along ancient, time-worn paths and industrious merchants traversed dusty, well-trodden roads, transporting precious commodities from far-flung, distant lands. It was, by all accounts, a peaceful realm, adequately prosperous. Yet Midas frequently found his gaze drawn to his royal treasury, harboring an insatiable longing for it to contain an even greater abundance. Indeed, Midas had cultivated what might be accurately described as a compulsive preoccupation with enumeration. Each morning, after partaking of his morning repast of delicate honey cakes and fresh goat's milk, he would descend the worn stone steps leading to his subterranean treasure room. There, he would allow his fingers to sift through gleaming heaps of silver coins, lift ornate golden cups to capture and refract the soft lamplight, and meticulously arrange precious gems in perfectly aligned rows. The rhythmic clicking sounds emanating from the metallic currency and polished stones became a peculiar sort of music to his ears, an opulent auditory tapestry, the very symphony of his accumulated wealth. However, Midas soon discovered that wealth possessed a singular paradoxical characteristic. The more one possessed, the more acutely one became aware of what one lacked. His treasury, which had once appeared splendidly replete and boundless, began to feel regrettably inadequate and disappointingly small when he mentally juxtaposed it against the fabled fortunes of other illustrious kingdoms. He frequently heard captivating accounts of Egyptian pharaohs whose tombs were purportedly overflowing with gold, of Persian kings whose magnificent crowns boasted gems the size of bird eggs, and of influential merchants who commanded entire fleets of ships laden with untold treasures. One particularly balmy midday, as Midas ambled through his fragrant rose garden, earnestly endeavoring to dislodge these avaricious golden notions from his consciousness, he overheard an uncharacteristic disturbance emanating from the vicinity of the garden's ornate fountain. His vigilant guards had stumbled upon an individual slumbering amidst the vibrant blossoms, an elderly man with stray leaves entwined in his hair and telltale wine stains upon his unadorned tunic. This was Silenus, a satyr and an esteemed companion to the venerable god Dionysus. Silenus, it transpired, had indulged in revelry with excessive fervor the preceding night, and had inadvertently wandered away from Dionysus's boisterous procession, eventually succumbing to sleep within the serene confines of Midas's private garden. Most monarchs might have been justifiably vexed by the unexpected presence of an interloper in their private domains. But Midas, intrigued by this peculiar sojourner, exhibited a rare curiosity. For a full 10 days, Midas extended esteemed hospitality to Silenus, treating him as an honored guest. They partook of leisurely repasts upon the palace veranda, observing the crepuscular glow imbue the remote peaks of the distant mountains with shifting shades of gold and purple. Silenus recounted captivating stories of his extensive travels with Dionysus, tales of vibrant festivals in exotic cities, of vineyards that yielded nectar so exquisitely sweet as to elicit tears of rapture from mortals, and of joyous celebrations that persisted from one new moon to the next. What resonated most profoundly with Midas in these narratives was their consistent theme. They were never focused on the amassing of possessions, but rather on the profound savoring of transient experiences. Silenus spoke eloquently of perfect evenings when the harmonious strains of music and the effervescent peals of laughter seemed to elevate people above their ordinary concerns, of simple meals that became magical simply because they were shared with cherished friends, and of spontaneous dances that continued until dawn because no one desired the unadulterated joy to cease. When Dionysus eventually appeared to reclaim his comrade, he was so profoundly gratified by Midas's exceptional generosity that he offered the monarch the fulfillment of any wish he harbored. Anything at all, Dionysus declared, his gaze sparkling with a particular brand of playful malice that gods sometimes display when they anticipate that human beings are on the verge of committing fascinating errors. Without a moment's hesitation, Midas articulated his desire. Grant me that everything I touch transforms into gold. Dionysus subtly raised an eyebrow, inquiring if Midas was absolutely certain this was his true and ultimate desire. The king nodded enthusiastically, already envisioning the substantial heft of countless auric currency, the resplendent luminescence of gilded effigies, and the boundless pecuniary opulence that would soon be unequivocally his. Dionysus bestowed the boon with an almost nonchalant movement, as if merely brushing aside a minor annoyance. "It is done," he stated simply. And then, he and Silenus departed, abandoning Midas to the nascent, formidable capabilities he now possessed. The initial test was a modest one. Midas extended his hand and touched a delicate rose from his garden. Instantaneously, the tender floral segments solidified into hard, lustrous gold. The transmutation was, in its own way, aesthetically remarkable. Every intricate detail of the flower was impeccably retained. Every graceful curve of every petal caught forever in precious metal, yet the rose no longer exuded its sweet fragrance, nor did it sway gently in the passing breeze. It had become a perfect, exquisitely crafted, yet utterly inert simulacrum of its former vibrant self. Nevertheless, Midas was ecstatic. He traversed his palace, imparting his touch to every accessible object. Chairs became chairs of solid gold. Curtains transformed into heavy, shimmering golden drapes. Even the very stones beneath his feet turned to gold as he took each step. By evening, his palace resembled a fantastical vision, a scene plucked from a dream. Every surface shimmered, every article was invaluable, every corner worth more than entire kingdoms. However, difficulties commenced precisely with the evening repast. Midas, thoroughly fatigued by his diurnal transmutation, settled down to eat. He reached for a plump grape, and it instantly became hard, solid aurum in his fingers. He attempted to drink wine, but it congealed into a metallic fluid the moment it touched his lips. Bread, honey, even plain water. Everything he tried to consume became inedible gold the instant he touched it. That first night, Midas lay in his golden bed, surrounded by golden pillows, staring fixedly at his golden ceiling, and felt his abdomen racked with excruciating pangs of starvation. The bitter paradox did not escape his notice. He was, in all likelihood, the wealthiest man in the entire world, yet he could not afford a simple, life-sustaining meal. But the profound sorrow, the true heartbreak, arrived the following morning when his beloved daughter, Zoe, ran to greet him. As was her cherished daily custom, she was his most cherished delight, a vivacious decennary child who suffused the royal abode with her infectious laughter and an endless stream of inquisitive inquiries about everything she encountered. Unthinkingly, Midas extended his arms to enfold her in his usual embrace. The transformation was instantaneous and immutable. One moment, Zoe was running towards him, her face bright with morning joy, and the next, she was an impeccable auric effigy, eternally immobilized in nascent motion. Her expression of happy anticipation was precisely maintained, but she could no longer speak, no longer laugh, no longer ask the endless questions that had brought Midas greater felicity than any earthly riches ever could. Midas collapsed to a genuflecting posture beside his daughter's golden form, lacrimal rivulets coursing down his visage, comprehending at last the true cost of his exchange. All the gold in the world, he realized, held no significance whatsoever compared to Zoe's tender grasp entwined with his own, her sweet voice calling, "Good morning, Papa," her animated prattling about the birds she'd observed from her window. The king spent 3 agonizing days sitting beside his daughter's statue, unable to eat, unable to sleep properly, plagued by the reverberation of his own perambulations, echoing through halls that had become aesthetically pleasing, yet utterly devoid of vitality. Everything he looked at served as a poignant memento of his forfeiture. The golden roses ceased their efflorescence. The golden fruit trees would never again offer shelter or nourishment. His golden palace had become a magnificent sepulchre. Finally, Midas, with a heart heavy with regret, journeyed to the river where Dionysus had indicated he could be found, should the king ever require his presence again. Dionysus was already there, seemingly anticipating this very moment, his composure unruffled by Midas's visibly gaunt and desperate appearance. "I was profoundly misguided," Midas confessed, his voice laced with anguish. "Please, I implore you, reclaim this perilous gift. I would gladly embrace the life of the humblest pauper rather than remain the wealthiest monarch unable to embrace his beloved daughter." Dionysus responded with a gentle nod, his expression conveying a deep, understanding sympathy. "Immerse yourself in the waters of the river Pactolus," he instructed, his tone calm and clear. "Its flowing currents will purge you of the golden touch, and you may then reverse the transformations you have wrought by sprinkling its sacred water upon them." Midas, galvanized by this glimmer of hope, sprinted towards the riverbank and plunged into its refreshing embrace, still fully clad in his royal raiment. The profound sense of liberation he experienced as the burdensome power receded from him was utterly ineffable. With renewed purpose, he hastily filled several vessels with the river's life-giving water and rushed back to his palace. He meticulously sprinkled the water on every object he had inadvertently turned to gold, reserving his cherished daughter for the very last, almost paralyzed by the fragile hope that flickered within him. But as the cool water cascaded over Zoe's inert golden form, a vibrant surge of color and warmth flowed back into her, like the first rays of dawn illuminating a shadowed valley. Her initial gasp for air, the hesitant flutter of her eyelids, her first bewildered query about the strange stiffness she felt. These simple sounds were, to Midas, more infinitely precious than all the harmonious melodies the world could offer. That very evening, as they shared a modest repast of freshly baked bread and briny olives, Zoe, observing her father intently, inquired why he seemed so profoundly changed, so much more attentive to every single word she uttered. Midas, with a newfound wisdom shining in his eyes, recounted to her the perilous allure of wishes and their unforeseen repercussions, articulating the crucial distinction between what we believe we desire and what truly brings profound contentment. From that pivotal day forward, Midas's royal treasury remained unostentatious, deliberately kept at a humble measure. Yet his profound appreciation for every single thing he possessed blossomed immeasurably. He now keenly observed the way the soft morning light bathed Zoe's face during their breakfast, a detail previously unnoticed. He savored the simple, earthy taste of food shared with those he held dear. He dedicated countless hours to conversations that generated no material wealth, but instead imbued his days with an unparalleled sense of meaning and connection. The river Pactolus, legend holds, continues to carry shimmering flecks of gold within its currents, not as a lingering remnant of Midas's transformative touch, but as an enduring symbol of the profound lesson learned upon its banks concerning what truly holds intrinsic value. Sometimes, in the hushed stillness of the late night, when the world outside falls silent, one might find oneself contemplating one's own deepest desires, pondering the stark difference between the superficial glitter of material possessions and the experiences that genuinely enrich one's existence. What unassuming pleasures, perhaps, have you inadvertently overlooked in your relentless pursuit of things that merely seemed more valuable? What precious moments of genuine human connection patiently await your notice and heartfelt appreciation, proving themselves far more valuable than any gleaming gold? Speaking of treasures both irrevocably lost and fortuitously found, let us now allow our thoughts to drift towards a narrative that has captivated and perplexed minds for millennia. The enthralling tale of Atlantis, a metropolis so extraordinarily advanced, so breathtakingly beautiful, and ultimately so consumed by its own pride that it tragically vanished beneath the tumultuous waves in the span of a single, catastrophic day and night. Picture, if you will, an illustrious island nation situated far beyond the famed Pillars of Hercules, a geographical marker we now recognize as the Strait of Gibraltar. This was no ordinary landmass, but rather a realm where human ingenuity had achieved feats of engineering and artistry that bordered on the miraculous. The magnificent city of Atlantis itself was meticulously constructed in a series of perfect concentric circles, each ring elegantly separated by intricate canals that shimmered like priceless jewels under the radiant Mediterranean sun. The Atlanteans proudly claimed direct descent from Poseidon himself, the mighty god of the sea. Their venerable founder, Atlas, had been bestowed with dominion over this island paradise, and his people had inherited both his sagacity and his profound spiritual connection to the vast ocean that embraced their home. For countless generations, they lived in exquisite harmony with the sea, their impressive vessels traversing distant lands, not as instruments of conquest, but as welcomed carriers of trade and esteemed teachers of advanced knowledge. What truly rendered Atlantis remarkable was not merely its immense material wealth, although the city undoubtedly possessed riches beyond the wildest stretches of human imagination. The true marvel lay in the sophisticated manner in which the Atlanteans had meticulously organized their intricate society. They had developed remarkably equitable systems of governance that masterfully balanced the cherished principle of individual liberty with a pervasive sense of collective community responsibility. Their esteemed educational institutions imparted not only practical proficiencies, but also profound philosophical insights and rigorous ethical principles. Their bustling markets operated on unwavering principles of fairness and transparency, ensuring that every citizen had equitable access to all that they required for a prosperous life. The distinctive architecture of Atlantis eloquently mirrored this overarching societal harmony. The innermost circle majestically housed the grand palace and sacred temples, meticulously crafted from pristine white, deep black, and vibrant red stone quarried directly from the island's abundant resources. These magnificent edifices were not merely functional structures. They were meticulously designed to inspire awe and reverence in all who beheld them, their perfectly balanced proportions instilling a profound sense of tranquility and wonder. The middle rings encompassed lush gardens and expansive gymnasiums, thoughtfully designated spaces where citizens could diligently cultivate both their physical prowess and their intellectual acumen. The outermost ring bustled with workshops and bustling harbors, where the practical, industrious work of the thriving city was skillfully carried out. But perhaps most breathtaking were the prodigious engineering achievements that punctuated the Atlantean landscape. The Atlanteans had devised an ingenious network of sophisticated bridges and subterranean tunnels that seamlessly connected all the concentric rings, facilitating the remarkably efficient movement of people and goods throughout the sprawling city. They had pioneered innovative methods of climate control that ensured their buildings remained comfortably temperate throughout the entire year. Their state-of-the-art harbors were capable of accommodating colossal ships from every corner of the known world, equipped with advanced mechanical devices that rendered the loading and unloading of cargo astonishingly swift and remarkably safe. For many glorious centuries, this meticulously crafted system operated with unparalleled efficacy and grace. Atlantean explorers, driven by an insatiable thirst for knowledge, brought back invaluable insights from distant lands, intricate mathematical concepts from the ancient civilization of Babylon, precise astronomical observations from the venerable land of Egypt, and profound philosophical ideas from the burgeoning Greek city-states. But instead of merely adopting these foreign intellectual currents outright, the Atlanteans ingeniously integrated them with their own deeply rooted traditions, forging powerful syntheses that were far greater and more impactful than the mere sum of their individual parts. The critical turning point, however, arrived insidiously, unfolding so gradually that the vast majority of Atlanteans failed to perceive its creeping onset. Success, it seems, harbors its own insidious perils. As the city spiraled into ever greater prosperity, its citizens began to take their extraordinary achievements for granted, their vigilance waning. The intricate systems that had once demanded careful maintenance and unwavering attention were now blithely assumed to be self-sustaining, requiring no further oversight. The foundational values that had so steadfastly guided earlier generations began to appear antiquated, perceived as unnecessary constraints on what seemed like their boundless and limitless potential. A new generation of leaders inevitably emerged, individuals who had matured amidst Atlantis' unparalleled wonders, without ever having to exert effort or struggle to bring them into being. They surveyed their flawlessly organized city, and with a growing sense of hubris, determined that the time had come for aggressive expansion. It was time, they believed, to disseminate Atlantis' demonstrably superior ways across the rest of the world, regardless of whether the rest of the world genuinely desired this imposition. These new leaders began to articulate fervent pronouncements about Atlantis' manifest destiny, its inherent responsibility to shepherd and guide what they deemed lesser civilizations. They rapidly developed military technologies that were every bit as advanced and sophisticated as their earlier peaceful innovations had been. Their magnificent ships, once universally welcomed in foreign ports as benevolent bearers of trade and profound knowledge, began to arrive instead as ominous harbingers of imminent conquest. The insidious change was palpable, evident even in the city's established daily rhythms. The vibrant forums where citizens had once passionately gathered to robustly debate public policy transformed into mere venues where governmental decisions were simply announced, devoid of democratic discourse. The esteemed schools began to prioritize narrow technical training over expansive ethical reflection. The once creative workshops now primarily focused on the mass production of weapons and instruments of control, rather than objects of exquisite beauty and practical utility. But the vigilant gods, particularly the mighty Zeus, observed these troubling developments with mounting apprehension. The Atlanteans had been graciously endowed with their extraordinary gifts as a grand experiment in the boundless potential of humanity. What indeed might people achieve if granted ideal conditions and divine guidance? The ambitious experiment was clearly faltering, not as a result of external pressures or unforeseen natural calamities, but rather due to the detrimental choices the Atlanteans themselves were consciously making. Zeus consequently convened a solemn council of the gods to deliberate upon the appropriate course of action. Some deities passionately argued for immediate intervention, for dispatching clear signs and potent warnings that might steer Atlantis back towards its original, virtuous path. Others suggested that the experiment should be permitted to run its full course, contending that even profound failure might impart invaluable lessons. But Zeus, with ultimate authority, decisively concluded that Atlantis had evolved into a grave threat, not merely to other nascent civilizations, but to the delicate balance of the entire world itself. The end descended with terrifying swiftness. In the course of a single cataclysmic day and night, marked by devastating earthquakes and torrential floods, Atlantis was swallowed whole by the raging waves. The impeccably engineered canals, once pathways of beauty, became conduits for the encroaching sea to surge inward. The magnificent buildings, meticulously designed to endure for eternity, crumbled tragically under forces far beyond their architects' most sophisticated calculations. The once proud ships, which had been poised to disseminate Atlantean influence across the globe, were reduced to scattered debris strewn across the silent ocean floor. Yet, here lies what elevates the narrative of Atlantis beyond a mere cautionary tale of divine retribution. It is also profoundly a story about the enduring power of memory and the imperative of learning. The physical destruction was absolute, but the invaluable knowledge was not entirely obliterated. A number of Atlanteans had been traveling abroad when the disaster struck, while others had migrated to distant colonies years prior. These fortunate survivors carried with them not only their advanced technical knowledge, but also the vivid, haunting memory of what their magnificent civilization had achieved, and crucially, why it had ultimately fallen. These scattered remnants of Atlantean wisdom subtly yet profoundly influenced the subsequent development of other emerging cultures. The intricate mathematical insights found their way into the sophisticated astronomical practices of Babylon. The elegant architectural principles reappeared in the monumental structures of Egypt. The profound philosophical ideas significantly contributed to the vibrant flowering of Greek thought. However, the astute survivors were scrupulously careful to share only the constructive and beneficial aspects of their rich heritage, while diligently keeping alive the solemn warnings about the perils of unchecked pride and the corrupting abuse of power. This, then, is why Plato, centuries later, meticulously documented the story of Atlantis. not as a historian meticulously recording empirical facts, but as a profound philosopher eloquently exploring timeless ideas. So, he skillfully employed the narrative to rigorously examine questions that were as intrinsically relevant to the citizens of ancient Athens as they remain to us in the present day. What inevitably transpires when a society's formidable capabilities far outstrip its accompanying wisdom? How do we conscientiously maintain the fundamental values that initially propelled us to success, once success itself becomes an ordinary commonplace condition? What profound responsibilities are inherently coupled with power, whether exercised by an individual or wielded by a collective entity? The physical Atlantis may have irretrievably vanished beneath the ocean's depths, but its deeper, metaphorical meaning continues to surface in new and pertinent forms. Every civilization that has achieved truly great things has, at some crucial juncture, invariably confronted the very same fundamental choice that challenged the Atlanteans: whether to utilize their magnificent achievements as constructive tools for building and progress, or as destructive weapons for dominating and subjugating others. As the evening descends and individuals prepare for slumber, it is an opportune moment for contemplation regarding the personal Atlantises that exist within their own existence. One might ponder the intricate systems and cherished relationships meticulously constructed over time, which invariably demand diligent upkeep and devoted attention to perpetually flourish and remain vibrant. Furthermore, it becomes crucial to reflect upon the foundational values that steadfastly guide one's decisions, particularly when the intoxicating allure of success might tempt an individual to believe that established principles no longer apply to their unique circumstances. Perhaps the most profound treasure is not merely the magnificent structures or achievements one brings into being, but rather the profound discernment and sagacity required to safeguard and sustain the most essential qualities of those very creations. From the contemplation of fabled cities that ultimately succumbed to oblivion, the narrative now gracefully pivots to the enduring phenomenon of changes that perpetually recur. This refers to the eternal majestic cycle that orchestrates the interplay of darkness and light, the profound rhythm of death and subsequent rebirth, and the poignant realization that every ending inherently contains the nascent promise of a new beginning. This ancient tale serves as the very genesis for understanding the advent of our world's distinct seasons, and it illuminates why, at times, the most imperative and transformative journeys are precisely those that compel individuals to venture farthest from the familiar comforts of their origins. Persephone, the cherished daughter of Demeter, who presided as the revered goddess of the harvest, had spent her formative years enveloped by the boundless and ceaseless bounty her mother meticulously cultivated. Their sacred dwelling was nestled within a verdant valley, where the essence of spring appeared to reign eternally. Here, blossoms perpetually unfurled their vibrant petals, trees consistently bore succulent fruit, and fields were perpetually primed for a bountiful harvest. It was undeniably a realm of breathtaking beauty, yet perhaps it was also somewhat excessively shielded, a touch too flawless for a young soul burgeoning with curiosity about the vast and unexplored expanse of the wider cosmos. Persephone's days unfolded in leisurely excursions through sun-drenched meadows, accompanied by her joyous companions, the spirited ocean nymphs who had been her inseparable playmates since the tenderest years of her childhood. Together, they would while away the hours gathering fragrant wildflowers, intricately weaving delicate crowns from supple vines, recounting enchanting stories, and engaging in games whose sole purpose was the pure, unadulterated expression of joy. It was, by all accounts, an idyllic and untroubled existence. However, in recent times, Persephone had begun to experience a peculiar and growing disquietude, a nascent sensation that a wealth of experiences and profound knowledge lay waiting just beyond the carefully guarded confines of her mother's sheltered valley. She had, with increasing frequency, started posing questions to Demeter that invariably stirred discomfort within the benevolent harvest goddess. What hidden forces, she wondered, existed beneath the earth's surface that compelled plants to sprout and thrive? Why was it that certain seeds necessitated being interred in profound darkness before they could aspire towards the light? What transpired during the segment of the life cycle that her mother consistently neglected to mention? The inevitable process of dying that appeared to be an indispensable precursor to any subsequent rebirth. Demeter, with an almost reflexive instinct, consistently redirected the conversation whenever these unsettling inquiries surfaced. She had invested immense effort and unwavering dedication into crafting a realm where her beloved daughter would never be exposed to the harsh realities of loss or suffering. The very notion that Persephone might harbor a burgeoning curiosity about these more somber dimensions of existence profoundly disquieted her. In response, she intensified her protective vigilance, diligently ensuring that her daughter's days remained perpetually filled with pleasant, diverting activities designed specifically to shield her from such disturbing and profound thoughts. Yet, Hades, the formidable lord of the underworld, had, for some time, been observing Persephone with keen interest from his distant, shadowy domain. He had keenly perceived her inherently questioning disposition, her palpable dissatisfaction with facile explanations, and her undeniable courage in venturing to pose challenging and uncomfortable queries. In stark contrast to her mother, he did not find these intrinsic qualities to be in the least bit troubling. On the contrary, he found them remarkably admirable. Here, he mused, was an individual who might genuinely comprehend that darkness and light were not adversaries, but rather indispensable partners, inextricably linked in the grand, intricate ballet of existence. The pivotal day that irrevocably altered everything commenced like any other, seemingly unremarkable morning. Persephone was engaged in her customary pastime of gathering blossoms with her companions in a meadow that, on this particular occasion, appeared to possess an extraordinary, almost ethereal beauty. The verdant grass felt exquisitely soft and yielding beneath their feet, and the air was suffused with a warm, pervasive sweetness, redolent with the intoxicating perfume of blooming narcissus. Persephone found her gaze irresistibly drawn to one particular flower, a narcissus that seemed to pulsate with a more intense vibrancy than all the others, its delicate petals capturing the ambient light in a manner that was almost mesmerizingly hypnotic. As she gracefully bent to pluck this singular, extraordinary bloom, the very earth beneath her feet dramatically cleaved open. Yet, instead of plummeting downwards in a terrifying fall, she experienced the sensation of being gently cradled and lifted by unseen, ethereal hands, steadily carried down through countless strata of soil and ancient stone into subterranean caverns that shimmered and glittered with an untold wealth of precious gems and rare metals. The journey, while undeniably tinged with an initial sense of trepidation, was simultaneously profoundly wondrous. She was privileged to witness parts of the world that no living being had ever before had the opportunity to experience. Upon her arrival in the underworld, she was not received as a captive, but rather as an honored guest within a palace of such breathtaking magnificence that it transcended anything she could have possibly conceived. Its expansive halls were meticulously carved from lustrous black marble, intricately veined with delicate silver, and illuminated by an enigmatic array of flames that, remarkably, cast no shadows, yet generated a comforting warmth entirely devoid of smoke. Gardens flourished even here, though they bore no resemblance to any in the upper world. These were plants that bloomed resplendently in perpetual darkness, trees that bore fruits of shimmering silver and gleaming gold, and flowers that, instead of releasing fragrance, sang soft, haunting melodies. Hades greeted her with an impeccably formal courtesy, elucidating that his purpose in bringing her to his realm was not born of selfish desire, but rather from a profound conviction that she possessed the unique capacity to truly comprehend both worlds. The vibrant realm of growth and abundance above, and the contemplative domain of rest and transformation below. He extended an invitation to reveal to her the intricate workings of his dominion, the sophisticated systems that underpinned and enabled the continuous cycle of renewal in the upper world. What Persephone subsequently witnessed fundamentally challenged every preconception she had ever held regarding death and finality. The underworld, she discovered, was not a punitive realm, but rather a vast and meticulously orchestrated recycling system, where souls found repose and underwent a profound renewal between successive lives. She observed firsthand the intricate process by which the vital energy of lives that had run their course was transmuted into the potential for nascent growth. She gained an invaluable understanding of the meticulous balance indispensable for ensuring the sustained viability of life above ground. Meanwhile, in the vibrant upper world, Demeter had been utterly devastated by the discovery of her daughter's inexplicable disappearance. Consumed by a frantic maelstrom of grief and incandescent rage, in her profound distress, she completely abandoned her sacred duties as goddess of the harvest. Traversing the vast expanse of the earth in a desperate, relentless quest for Persephone. Deprived of Demeter's vital attention, crops across the land began to languish and fail. Fruit-bearing trees ceased their generous offerings. Even the very grass, once lush and green, started to wither and die. The eternal spring that had once characterized Demeter's realm abruptly gave way to a phenomenon the world had never before experienced. A barren, biting cold, ushering in a season of profound scarcity and agonizing waiting. Mortals across the land began to suffer immensely as essential foodstuffs became increasingly scarce, and the very earth itself appeared to be consciously withdrawing its life-sustaining support. They fervently implored the other gods for succor, but Demeter, consumed by her sorrow, remained impervious to their desperate entreaties. She adamantly refused to restore the earth's abundance until her beloved daughter was safely returned to her embrace. Zeus, observing the escalating global crisis with growing concern, ultimately decided to intervene. He dispatched Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, to engage in negotiations with Hades for Persephone's release and return. However, upon Hermes' arrival in the underworld, he encountered a situation far more intricate than anticipated. Persephone had, in fact, partaken of the underworld sustenance, not because she had been maliciously deceived or coerced, but because she had made a deliberate, conscious choice to taste a few seeds from a pomegranate, thereby willingly accepting the profound consequences of that pivotal action. More significantly, Persephone had come to the profound realization that she no longer desired to return to her previous life permanently. The invaluable knowledge she had acquired during her time in the underworld had irrevocably transformed her. She now understood with perfect clarity why she had experienced that persistent restlessness in her mother's meticulously protected valley. She had, in essence, been intuitively sensing the inherent incompleteness of experiencing only one half of existence's grand, cyclical continuum. The ingenious resolution that eventually emerged from the complex negotiations ultimately satisfied all parties involved, albeit requiring a measure of sacrifice from each. Persephone was decreed to spend a portion of each year in the underworld, alongside Hades, where she would continue to delve into the profound mysteries of death and transformation. For the remainder of the year, she would return to the upper world, bringing with her the invaluable wisdom and insights she had garnered from her sojourn below. When Persephone finally returned for her inaugural reunion with Demeter, both mother and daughter had been irrevocably altered by their period of separation. Demeter had come to the poignant realization that her fiercely protective love, when taken to its extremes, could inadvertently become a prison of its own making. Persephone, in turn, had acquired a breadth of knowledge that rendered her a more complete and multifaceted individual, someone who now intimately understood the intricate interplay of both joy and sorrow, the necessity of growth and the virtue of rest, and the interconnectedness of beginnings and endings. Their poignant reunion heralded the triumphant return of abundance to the parched and suffering earth. However, it was an abundance of a qualitatively different nature than before, characterized by greater complexity, enhanced sustainability, and a more profound realism. The world now experienced the rhythmic progression of distinct seasons. Periods of lavish plenty now gracefully alternated with times of judicious scarcity. Cycles of vigorous growth were now interspersed with essential periods of restorative rest. This profound shift was not a punitive measure or an enduring loss, but rather a more mature and nuanced comprehension of how fundamental cycles truly operate. During the months when Persephone graciously dwelled above ground, the earth burst forth in the vibrant bloom of spring and flourished exuberantly through the warmth of summer. Conversely, during her time spent below, autumn brought forth its rich harvest, and winter ushered in a period of necessary repose. Farmers, embracing this newfound understanding, learned to harmoniously work with these natural rhythms rather than attempting to resist them, diligently storing the abundance gleaned from the growing season to sustain themselves through the subsequent fallow periods. However, the more profound and enduring gift bestowed by Persephone's extraordinary journey was the profound wisdom she brought back concerning the indispensable necessity of difficult and challenging experiences. She had learned, through direct immersion, that certain profound kinds of growth are exclusively attainable within the embrace of darkness, that particular forms of inner strength are forged only through the crucible of confronting arduous challenges, and that certain invaluable types of understanding emerge solely from the lived experience of loss followed by recovery. Consequently, she assumed a symbolic role as a compassionate guide for mortals as they navigated their own inevitable, necessary descents, those pivotal moments in life when they were called upon to relinquish familiar comforts and bravely venture into uncharted, often daunting territories. Her timeless narrative served as a powerful reminder to them that such journeys, however initially frightening or unwelcome they might appear, frequently led to profound discoveries that ultimately rendered the intrepid travelers more whole, more capable, and more authentically alive. The ancient Greeks, who meticulously crafted and transmitted this enduring narrative, possessed an invaluable understanding concerning the intricate process of human development. They recognized that individuals cannot perpetually linger in the sheltered, perennial springs of childhood. They understood that true maturity necessitates a profound acceptance and reconciliation with the inevitable cycles of loss and subsequent recovery that define existence. Furthermore, they acknowledged that genuine wisdom frequently blossoms from the courageous act of willingly entering experiences that, at their outset, may seem inherently threatening or deeply unwelcome. As the distinct seasons of an individual's own life continue their ancient, unwavering rotation, it is prudent to reflect upon the profound lessons Persephone gleaned during her transformative descent. This includes the realization that sometimes the most profound and essential growth germinates in the darkest, most challenging places. It affirms that endings, far from being absolute, invariably create the fertile ground for new beginnings to take root. And it powerfully underscores that the courage required to confront and navigate difficult transitions often culminates in discoveries far more valuable and enriching than the comfort one chooses to leave behind. What nascent seeds of possibility, one might ask, might be patiently awaiting their moment to sprout within the fallow seasons of one's own lived experience? Moving beyond Persephone's willing journey into the chthonic realms, our focus now shifts to an entirely different expedition beneath the Earth's surface. This particular sojourn, however, was not impelled by curiosity, but by a devotion so profound it audaciously defied the very fabric of existence. We recount the legend of Orpheus, a figure whose melodic artistry could compel unyielding stones to shift and ferocious beasts to gentle, and whose boundless affection for Eurydice propelled him to undertake a task deemed utterly impossible. Orpheus was the scion of one of the 9 Muses, those revered goddesses who ignited inspiration across all artistic and intellectual pursuits. From his earliest years, he displayed an extraordinary aptitude for musical expression. Whenever he strummed his lyre, a magnificent instrument personally fashioned by the god Apollo, even the swiftest rivers would temper their currents to heed his strains. Trees would bow their branches, eager to absorb every note, and the most savage of creatures would settle peacefully, captivated by harmonies that seemed to encapsulate the world's entire spectrum of joy and sorrow. His compositions were not merely aesthetically pleasing, they possessed a transformative essence. Agrarians observed that their crops flourished with greater abundance when Orpheus's practice melodies drifted from afar. Shepherds noted that their flocks remained serene and robust as his tunes wafted over the hillsides. Even within bustling metropolises, citizens reported that disagreements were more readily settled, and daily chores felt less arduous on those days when Orpheus graced the public squares with his performances. Yet, despite the immense delight his music bestowed upon countless others, Orpheus himself frequently experienced a deep sense of isolation. He possessed the power to sway vast audiences to tears or laughter, to incite them to acts of benevolence or valor. Still, he yearned for a companion who comprehended not just his compositions, but the very soul behind the artistry. Someone who perceived him as more than a mere vessel for exquisite sounds. This kindred spirit he discovered in Eurydice, a graceful wood nymph whose inherent talents perfectly complemented his own, while Orpheus possessed the unparalleled ability to craft melodies expressing every human emotion. Eurydice possessed an intuitive comprehension of the natural world, enabling her to discern nuances in his musical creations that others invariably overlooked. She could listen to one of his pieces and instantly discern whether it had been composed at dawn or dusk, whether he had been observing soaring eagles or darting fish, whether his heart had been brimming with optimism or touched by a gentle melancholy. Their period of courtship unfolded like a prolonged, tender ballad. They would meander through verdant forests, where Orpheus would play his lyre softly, while Eurydice would indicate how various creatures reacted to distinct musical phrases. She imparted to him the skill of weaving natural sounds, the calls of birds, the whisper of wind through leaves, the murmur of water over stones, into his intricate compositions. In return, he revealed to her how profound human sentiments could be conveyed through rhythm and melody in ways that mere words could never fully encapsulate. Their nuptials were celebrated by both divine and mortal beings. Apollo himself provided the musical accompaniment for the ceremony, though he humbly conceded that his own performance seemed rather unadorned compared to the mastery his pupil had achieved. The 9 muses graced the occasion, each contributing her unique artistic gift to perfect the celebration. Hymen, the venerable god of marriage, consecrated their union with fervent invocations for enduring happiness and shared creative endeavors. For a brief, precious span, their shared existence perfectly mirrored their aspirations. They established a modest dwelling within a secluded grove, where the acoustics were ideally suited for musical creation. Mornings commenced with Orpheus composing, while Eurydice diligently tended their garden. Each was acutely attuned to the other's rhythm, their individual pursuits intertwining to forge a harmony grander than either could have achieved in solitude. Evenings were dedicated to exchanging the day's discoveries. A nascent melody Orpheus had conceived, an unusual avian call Eurydice had mastered mimicking. However, their profound contentment did not escape the notice of others, not all of whom harbored benevolent intentions. Aristaeus, a minor deity who had long harbored a covetous desire for Eurydice, observed their felicity with escalating rancor. He had previously bestowed gifts and showered attention upon Eurydice prior to her marriage, and her gentle yet resolute rejections had wounded his pride more deeply than he cared to acknowledge. One afternoon, while Orpheus was away consulting with fellow musicians, Aristaeus accosted Eurydice in her garden. His initial overtures were politely but unequivocally rebuffed, as he grew more importunate, implying that she merited a husband superior to a mere musician. Eurydice began to retreat, backing away towards the dense forest, hoping to elude him amidst the trees where she could maneuver with greater agility than he. In her desperate flight to escape, she inadvertently trod upon a venomous serpent that lay concealed in the luxuriant grass. The strike was instantaneous and lethal. By the time Orpheus returned and discovered her, she had already embarked upon her inexorable journey to the underworld, leaving behind only the diminishing warmth of a physical form that no longer contained the cherished spirit he adored. Orpheus's sorrow was an anguish of unprecedented magnitude, unlike anything the mortal world had ever witnessed. His lamentations were so utterly heartbroken that they distorted the very natural order. Trees shed their foliage out of season, as if in mourning. Rivers swelled their banks, appearing to weep in sympathy. Wild creatures emerged from their clandestine refuges, no longer drawn by the enchanting beauty of his music as before, but compelled by a grief so profound it seemed to resonate with every living being that had ever experienced loss. For several days, Orpheus remained utterly incapacitated, doing nothing but sitting beside Eurydice's grave, playing melodies that articulated his boundless despair. Yet gradually, a daring new concept began to coalesce in his mind. His music had consistently demonstrated the capacity to accomplish the seemingly impossible. Why should the ultimate barrier of death prove any different from other obstacles? If his songs possessed the power to dislodge stones and pacify tempestuous storms, perhaps they could also sway the formidable hearts of the deities who governed the underworld. Defying the solemn counsel of all who knew him, Orpheus resolved to descend into the abyssal realm of Hades and present a petition for Eurydice's resurrection. He made his way to one of the clandestine portals to the underworld, a cavern so unfathomably deep and shrouded in darkness that no mortal explorer had ever returned from its depths. But Orpheus ventured forth armed solely with his lyre, implicitly trusting that his music would afford him protection where conventional weaponry and armor would prove utterly ineffectual. The passage through the underworld unfolded like a traverse across a landscape congealed from pure sorrow. He journeyed through vast caverns where the very walls perpetually wept, traversed rivers that flowed with the ceaseless tears of the bereaved, and passed through valleys where the pervasive mist was formed from countless final sighs. Yet everywhere he ventured, his transcendent music preceded him. And the denizens of this somber domain, entities long accustomed to an eternity of sadness, found themselves stirring with an emotion they had all but forgotten: hope. Even Cerberus, the fearsome three-headed hound that guarded the very gates of Hades, was profoundly affected by Orpheus's heart-wrenching lament. Instead of assailing the living intruder, the colossal beast lowered all three of its formidable heads and allowed its myriad eyes to close. Lulled into a tranquil slumber by melodies that spoke of a love so potent, it seamlessly transcended the very boundaries between vitality and mortality. When Orpheus finally arrived before the majestic throne room of Hades and Persephone, his music had already heralded his presence. The formidable rulers of the underworld sat in expectant silence, cognizant that they were about to receive a plea unlike any ever voiced within their domain. Orpheus performed for them the entire chronicle of his profound love for Eurydice, their initial encounter, their tender courtship, their fleeting period of happiness, and his utterly devastating loss. But more than merely recounting his tale, he played the very essence of love itself. Melodies that evoked in even these divine beings memories of cherished connections, of sorrows they had personally endured, of the profound ways in which caring for another imbues life with its deepest and most enduring significance. Persephone, who understood more intimately than most the agonizing pain of severance from those held dear, wept openly and unreservedly as she listened. Hades, typically impervious to the supplications of mere mortals, found himself unexpectedly recalling his own gnawing longing during the months when Persephone resided in the sunlit upper world. For the first time in the entire history of their dark realm, the sovereign rulers of the dead, consented to relinquish a soul back into the embrace of life. However, their extraordinary concession came burdened with stringent stipulations. Eurydice was permitted to return with Orpheus to the world above. But throughout their arduous ascent from the underworld, he was strictly forbidden from casting a backward glance at her. He had to implicitly trust that she was following. He was compelled to possess unwavering faith in what remained unseen. He had to unequivocally demonstrate that his love was sufficiently robust to operate on conviction rather than necessitating constant visual affirmation. The return journey commenced with a surge of exhilaration. Orpheus could distinctly hear Eurydice's footsteps trailing behind him. He could discern her presence with the same intuitive certainty he had always possessed whenever she was near. They meticulously retraced their path through the labyrinthine caverns and desolate valleys of the underworld, steadily progressing toward the beacon of light that demarcated the frontier between the dominion of the departed and the land of the living. But as they ascended the final passage leading to the surface, an insidious tendril of doubt began to insinuate itself into Orpheus's mind. The footsteps behind him seemed to grow imperceptibly fainter. The perception of Eurydice's presence felt increasingly tenuous. What if the gods had perpetrated a cruel deception? What if he was ascending towards the light in solitary isolation while Eurydice remained eternally ensnared below? What if his profound faith was misplaced and his beloved was, even at that moment, being dragged back into the abyssal depths? He would never again be granted permission to enter. Precisely as the cavern's mouth came into his field of vision, just as the warm sunlight of the upper world began to caress his face, Orpheus's resolute faith irrevocably faltered. He impulsively turned to glance back, seeking reassurance that Eurydice was indeed there, and she was for a fleeting instant. He beheld her face, saw her delicate hand extended towards him with an expression of boundless love and profound understanding. But in that very same moment, she began to dissipate, summoned back to the underworld by his transgression of the divine stipulation. Her final utterances to him contained no hint of reproach, only enduring love. She comprehended the involuntary impulse that had compelled him to look back, forgiving him for the momentary doubt that had tragically undone them both as she dissolved back into the enveloping darkness. She offered him a gentle smile, imbued with the same tender understanding that had initially captivated his heart. Ascending from the shadowy confines of the underworld, Orpheus found himself once more a solitary figure. This subsequent bereavement proved even more shattering than his initial grief, for he bore the heavy knowledge that his own actions had orchestrated this irreparable loss. A desperate attempt to re-enter the cavernous maw was met with an unyielding barrier. The entrance had, with an air of finality, sealed itself shut. The divine clemency, once spurned in a moment of human weakness, would not be extended a second time. Consequently, he spent the remainder of his days traversing the world as an itinerant musician. His melodies, now imbued with an extraordinary profoundness of anguish and sagacity, resonated with an even greater potency than in his earlier, more joyous compositions. Individuals journeyed from far-flung regions to experience his performances, not for the fleeting pleasure or merriment his compositions might once have offered, but rather because his evocative strains enabled them to comprehend their own personal setbacks, their internal battles with conviction and uncertainty, and their profound experiences of cherishing another so intensely that the mere prospect of separation became an almost insufferable burden. The enduring narrative of Orpheus and Eurydice has been perpetually recounted and reinterpreted across millennia, precisely because it profoundly resonates with a pervasive and fundamental aspect of the human condition. We all, at various junctures, confront instances where we are compelled to proceed with conviction rather than relying on absolute empirical knowledge. There are times when the very essence of love necessitates that we place our credence in that which remains imperceptible or unverified. Furthermore, we are all intimately familiar with the powerful allure to cast a retrospective glance, to seek immediate validation when entreated to simply believe. As slumber beckons, one might consider what profound insights this ancient myth subtly imparts regarding the intricate interplay between conviction and skepticism. What personal odysseys in your own existence demand a reliance on unwavering faith rather than undeniable certainty? What cherished bonds require you to affirm their authenticity, even when tangible proof or observable evidence might not always be readily available to your senses? Perhaps the most profound artistry we are capable of creating is not fashioned through conventional musical apparatus, but rather through the sheer fortitude to persistently advance towards illumination, even when we are constrained from turning around to confirm that cherished affection continues to trail faithfully in our wake.